Good morning. Welcome to the May 2017 open meeting of the Federal Communications Commission. Madam Secretary, would you please introduce our agenda this morning?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to you, and good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning.
For today's meeting, you will hear a presentation and 6 items for your consideration. First, you will hear a presentation on the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau's final report on its investigation into the VoLTE 911 outage AT&T Mobility experienced on March 8, 2017. Second, you will consider a notice of proposed rulemaking that would both facilitate the deployment of and reduce regulatory burdens on the 3 types of fixed satellite service earth stations authorized to transmit while in motion: earth stations on vessels, vehicle-mounted earth stations, and earth stations aboard aircraft. Third, you will consider a report and order that would amend provisions of the personal radio services located in Part 95 of the Commission's rules in order to address 2 petitions for rulemaking, update and modernize various rules to reflect current uses and technologies, remove outdated regulatory requirements, and reorganize the rules to make them easier to read and understand. Fourth, you will consider a public notice that would launch a review of the Commission's rules applicable to media entities and seek comment on what rules should be modified or repealed. Fifth, you will consider a notice of proposed rulemaking that would propose to eliminate the Commission's main studio rule, based on a tentative finding that the rule is now outdated and unnecessarily burdensome for broadcast stations. Sixth, you will consider a notice of proposed rulemaking that will propose to restore the Internet to a light touch regulatory framework by classifying broadband Internet access service as an information service and by seeking comment on the existing rules governing Internet service providers' practices. Seventh, you will consider a notice of proposed rulemaking that proposes to eliminate a rule requiring rural telecommunications service providers receiving USF support to impose higher minimum monthly rates on their customers than the rates paid by some of their urban counterparts, or otherwise lose some USF support. The Commission will also consider a related order that would freeze the current rate. This is your agenda for today. Please note the consent agenda listed in the Commission's May 2017 Sunshine Notice has been deleted from today's agenda. First, Lisa Folks, Acting Chief of the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, will introduce the presentation on the Bureau's final report on its investigation into the VoLTE 911 outage AT&T Mobility experience on March 8, 2017.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. And Ms. Folks, if you're ready, please proceed.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Clyburn, Commissioner O'Reilly. One of the Commission's fundamental responsibilities is to promote the safety of life and property through the use of communications services. Ensuring that the public has reliable access to 911 is central to that mission. That is why understanding the causes of 911 outages with a view towards preventing and mitigating the effects of future 911 outages is one of the Commission's most important tasks. On March 8, 2017, AT&T Mobility experienced a nationwide 911 outage affecting customers on its Voice over LTE service. Voice over LTE is the technology AT&T uses to transmit voice calls over its 4G LTE network. During the March 8 outage, approximately 12,600 unique callers were unable to reach 911 over a 5-hour period. This was one of the largest 911 outages ever reported to the Commission. Chairman Pai immediately directed the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau to conduct an investigation. Today, the Bureau presents its findings. With me today from the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau are Julia Tu, Electronics Engineer, James Wiley, Attorney Advisor, and Megan Henry, Law Clerk from the Bureau's Cybersecurity and Communications Reliability Division. I would like to thank the Division and other Bureau staff for their hard work on this report, as well as the other bureaus and offices that contributed. Mr. Wiley will present the report.
Thank you, Lisa. Good morning, Chairman Pai and Commissioners. As Lisa notes, the Bureau's report presents the findings of its investigation into the outage that interrupted VoLTE 911 calling for AT&T customers across the country for 5 hours on March 8, 2017. The failures that caused this outage occurred entirely within AT&T's network. In order to route 911 calls to the appropriate 911 call centers, AT&T maintains connections with subcontractors, Comtech and West. These subcontractors provide AT&T with 911 call routing information. Since these connections are critical to 911 service, AT&T's 911 network is programmed to reject all incoming connections except those originating from trusted IP addresses. On March 8th, AT&T unintentionally broke its connection to Comtech. AT&T initiated a network change that resulted in a mismatch between the trusted set of IP addresses in AT&T's network and the IP addresses Comtech used to send 911 call routing information to AT&T. This mismatch resulted in a loss of connectivity between AT&T and Comtech. As a result, AT&T was not able to receive 911 call routing information from Comtech and could not automatically route those 911 calls to the appropriate 911 call center. Instead, AT&T rerouted those calls to a backup call center for manual processing, but the backup call center dropped the majority of 911 calls that it received. When AT&T lost connectivity to Comtech, the network responded as programmed by resetting the paths between Comtech and AT&T. This reset failed to restore AT&T's connectivity to Comtech because the root cause of the problem, the mismatched IP addresses, had not been fixed. Further, it prevented AT&T from receiving 911 call routing information from West while the paths were being reset because Comtech and West shared paths to AT&T's 911 network. The outage ultimately affected nearly all 911 calls on AT&T's VoLTE network. Both the IP address mismatch that caused the outage and the network configuration issue that exacerbated it likely could have been avoided had AT&T implemented network reliability best practices with respect to its critical 911 network assets. While AT&T reports that it has fixed the issues that caused the March 8th outage, this event offers an illuminating case study for 911 network reliability. Among the lessons learned from the March 8th outage is the need for further outreach to industry to promote better awareness and understanding of network reliability best practices. Accordingly, the Bureau plans to release a public notice reminding companies of best practices and their importance. In addition, the March 8th outage demonstrates the need for closer coordination between service providers and 911 call centers during outages. When 911 service fails, 911 call centers play a critical role in advising their communities of alternative ways to reach help. While AT&T, Comtech, and West each made efforts to notify thousands of 911 call centers during the outage, apparently not all call centers received notification. Furthermore, some 911 call centers reported that the notifications were sent too late and were insufficiently informative. Timely and effective outage notification is critical to protecting public safety. Accordingly, the Bureau recommends working with stakeholders, including industry and 911 call centers, to ensure that consumers know how to best reach emergency services when 911 is unavailable. In particular, the Bureau plans to convene consumer groups, public safety entities, and service providers in the 911 ecosystem to participate in a workshop in order to discuss best practices and develop recommendations for improving situational awareness during 911 outages. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wiley and Ms. Folks. So we will now turn to comments from the bench, starting with Commissioner Clyburn.
As aptly demonstrated in this report, it is vital that we ensure that the systems supporting our nation's 911 services are both reliable and resilient. The steps AT&T proposes to take to prevent future 911 outages in its network are laudable and necessary. It is my sincere hope, however, that other industry carriers have not only taken the necessary steps to ensure their 911 network infrastructures are sound, but they are working to implement the voluntary network reliability best practices developed by the Communications Security Reliability and Interoperability Council. We might have forgotten because we just call it CISRIC. So I want to thank Chairman Pai for quickly initiating this investigation on the heels of the outage, as well as Lisa Folks and the entire team at the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, especially James Wiley, for the commendable work on this final report. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Clyburn. Commissioner O'Reilly.
I just had a question. You mentioned, if I understood correctly, mismatched addresses. How would that occur? Is it that's human error, or how did they get mismatched?
So there was a latent mismatch in the provisioning system that AT&T uses to assign IP addresses to its network and to its whitelist of trusted IP addresses. When AT&T made an unrelated network change, it resulted in that latent mismatch being input into the live network, and that's what broke AT&T's connectivity to Comtech.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Reilly. On March 8th, 12,539 Americans who were AT&T customers tried to call 911. But they couldn't reach emergency services because of a nationwide outage, as we have heard, of AT&T's VoLTE 911 network. When they placed that call, they heard fast busy signals, endless ringing, or simply silence. This was unacceptable. In times of trouble, Americans who are in need to be able to reach Americans who can help. And that's why as soon as this outage occurred, I immediately directed the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau to investigate. Today, as you have heard, the Bureau has delivered a thorough, fact-based report of its findings. These findings are based on data derived from the FCC's network outage reporting system and numerous interviews with officials from AT&T, subcontractors of Comtech and West, as well as several affected public safety answering points, or PSAPs, including the Office of United Communications here in Washington, D.C. These findings are highly instructive. Most importantly, as we've heard from Mr. Wiley, this outage could have been prevented. It was a result of mistakes that were made by AT&T. The Bureau's report shows that there were shortfalls in operational redundancies, risk assessment, and stakeholder and consumer outreach. Had AT&T followed certain best practices as outlined by the FCC's Communications Security, Reliability, and Interoperability Council, or CISRIC, this outage would have had much less impact. Indeed, the cause of the outage could and should have been identified and addressed with periodic audits of the network. Now, that's the bad news. The good news is that AT&T has now addressed these vulnerabilities that led to this outage. And had these safeguards been in place on March 8th, it is exceedingly unlikely that this outage would have occurred. Going forward, like Commissioner Clyburn, I urge every carrier to address similar vulnerabilities in their networks. Additionally, I ask industry, PSAPs, and consumer groups to work with the Bureau to explore ways to improve notifications to PSAPs and consumers when 911 outages occur. We can't turn back time and undo this outage, but by learning the right lessons from it, we can, we must, and we will reduce the odds that such an outage will happen again. I, too, like my colleagues, want to thank the Bureau's staff for their expertise, speed, and tenacity they have brought to bear on this important task. I also commend AT&T for cooperating with the Bureau to help us get to the bottom of this outage. In particular, I would like to thank Michael Caiafa, Rochelle Cohen, Michelle Connolly, Lisa Folks, Jeff Goldthorpe, John Healy, Megan Henry, Nicole McGinnis, Jerry Stanshine, Julia Tu, and the indefatigable James Wiley of the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau for your tireless efforts to secure the safety of all Americans. With that, Madam Secretary, if you could please announce the next item on today's agenda.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the next item on your agenda will be presented by the International Bureau. It is entitled Amendment of Parts 2 and 25 of the Commission's Rules to Facilitate the Use of Earth Stations in Motion Communicating with Geostationary Orbit Space Stations in Frequency Bands Allocated to the Fixed Satellite Service. And Thomas Sullivan, Acting Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
That's a mouthful. Thank you, Madam Secretary. Mr. Sullivan, when you're ready, please proceed.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners.
Good morning.
The International Bureau is very pleased to present you with this notice of proposed rulemaking. It is an exciting time for the satellite industry and one of the fastest growing segments is earth stations providing satellite broadband services on ships, aircraft, and vehicles, collectively known in the industry as Earth Stations in Motion, or ESIMs. The notice examines the rules governing the licensing and operation of ESIMs and has two broad goals. First, the notice proposes to consolidate the three types of ESIMs into a single regulatory category. This harmonization would streamline our rules for this entire segment of the satellite industry. The notice also proposes to eliminate unnecessary and outdated regulations. Second, and most significantly, the notice proposes to extend the rules for ESIMs to portions of the conventional Ka band. These proposals, if adopted, will facilitate the licensing and deployment of earth stations in this growing market. I'm joined at the table by Troy Tanner, Deputy Chief of the International Bureau, Jennifer Gilsonen, Assistant Chief, Jose Albuquerque, Chief of the Satellite Division, Chip Fleming, Chief Engineer, Cindy Spears, Attorney Advisor in the Satellite Policy Branch. I would like to acknowledge the outstanding contributions on this item from other staff in the International Bureau, especially Paul Blaise and Joe Hill, as well as from colleagues in the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, Office of Engineering and Technology, and the Office of General Counsel. Cindy will present the item.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. This draft notice of proposed rulemaking opens a review of the Commission's rules that govern the licensing and operation of Earth Stations in Motion, ESIMs, which include Earth stations on vessels, vehicles, and aircraft. The Commission's current rules provide for blanket licensing for operations of these Earth stations communicating with C-band and Ku-band geostationary orbit satellites in the fixed satellite service. The regulation of these Earth stations have developed in separate but overlapping proceedings divided by the individual types: Earth stations on vessels, or ESVs, vehicle-mounted Earth stations, VMES, and Earth stations aboard aircraft, ESAA. As an initial matter, the changes we propose would integrate the rules governing the licensing and operation of the different categories of ESIMs operating in different frequency bands. These changes would reduce redundancy and increase efficiency in processing applications in this growing market. Currently, Part 25 includes 4 different sections addressing operation of ESIMs with GSO FSS satellites. The NPRM seeks comment on our proposal to consolidate the technical and operational rules in these 4 sections into a consolidated ESIM technical and operational rules section. This section would be designated Section 25.228. The consolidated ESIM rule would also be extended to cover ESIMs in the Ka band, conventional Ka band. Several companies have applied and received licenses to operate ESIMs in the Ka band. The license applications were processed on an ad hoc basis, and the licenses were granted with waivers of the table of frequency of allocations and the Commission's Ka band plan. The NPRM proposes to amend a footnote to the table of frequency allocations so that Ka band ESIM applications could be routinely processed. Specifically, the amended footnote to the table would state that in the frequency bands defined in Part 25 as conventional Ka band, ESIMs are an application of the FSS and may be authorized to communicate with satellites in the GSO FSS on a primary basis. Finally, the item includes proposals to eliminate repetition and unnecessary rules. For example, the NPRM seeks comment on eliminating certain repetitive ESIM rules by referring to provisions in existing rules that apply to other GSO FSS Earth stations. It also seeks comment on the proposal to eliminate unnecessary ESIM rules. For example, it proposes to eliminate rules requiring precise pointing of Earth station antennas, which are unnecessary in view of the wording of our rules restricting transmission toward adjacent satellites. Further, the NPRM seeks comment on eliminating rule requiring logging of location data during ESIM operation, which to the best of our knowledge has never been invoked. The International Bureau recommends adoption of the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking and requests editorial privileges for technical and conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation. We'll now turn to comments from the bench. Commissioner Clyburn.
Thank you. Today, the Commission initiates a proceeding to harmonize and update rules governing the licensing and operation of Earth Stations in Motion, or ESIMs, in the GSO fixed satellite service. ESIMs include Earth stations on vessels, which are used to provide telecommunications services, including Internet access to cruise ships, merchant ships, and U.S. Navy vessels, among others. Earth stations aboard aircraft, which provide connectivity to commercial and private aircraft, and vehicle-mounted Earth stations, which provide broadband services to land vehicle and perhaps one day your connected car. An overarching objective of this proceeding is to facilitate deployment of ESIMs and promote innovative and flexible use of satellite technology to the benefit of consumers, a goal I think we can all share. I look forward to reviewing the record that develops in this proceeding and thank the staff of the International Bureau for your hard work on this item, and especially I would like to thank my friend Cindy for presenting the item.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner O'Reilly.
I appreciate all the efforts that went in to streamline our Commission rules on ESIMs, and I'll put the rest of my statement in the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. The FCC has rules for satellite Earth stations on ships. It also has almost identical rules for satellite Earth stations on land vehicles. And it also has almost identical rules for satellite Earth stations on aircraft. Having three sets of duplicative rules is unnecessary and inefficient. And so today we're simply proposing to combine these three rule sections into one, collectively called Earth Stations in Motion, or ESIMs. Now, with an acronym this appealing, some have speculated as to what popular references I might try to tie in here. I will, however, not go so far as to refer to the life simulation computer game from the turn of the century, The Sims. I will not mention the Heisman Trophy winner Billy Sims, nor the Super Bowl winning quarterback Phil Sims. And I will not go so far as to reference the Las Vegas actress Molly Sims. No, I'm going to focus on the facts. And the facts are that ESIMs are Earth stations that are on the go. And you can think of them as roving infrastructure that are connected to the satellite network that have the potential to promote broadband services, especially in places that are hard to serve, such as remote land masses and barren seas. Simplifying our rules will help the FCC process applications for new deployments more efficiently and will make it easier for satellite companies to offer customers additional service options. And authorizing eSIMs to operate in new bands, including the conventional Ka band, means more opportunities for deployment and more competition. In sum, this proposal meets two of the key goals of this commission: reducing unnecessary red tape and enabling the private sector, in this case, as Mr. Sullivan pointed out, a fast-growing segment of the satellite industry, to innovate and to invest in new technologies. Many thanks to all of those who worked on this item. In particular, thanks to Jose Albuquerque, Paul Blaze, Chip Fleming, Jennifer Gilsonen, Joe Hill, my Cindy Spears, who knows a lot about these issues and also gives me good parenting advice, Walt Strack, Tom Sullivan, and Troy Tanner in the International Bureau, Baman Badipur, Howard Griboff, Michael Ha, Nicholas Oros, and Jameson Prime in the Office of Engineering and Technology, Steve Benzo, Tim Hilfiger, Matt Pearl, Paul Powell, Blaise Cinto, and Joel Tabenblatt from the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, and last but not least, Deborah Broderson and David Horowitz from the Office of General Counsel. All of your efforts are much appreciated. I will now proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner Clyburn?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Reilly?
Aye.
The chair votes aye as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges granted as requested. Thanks to the International Bureau. And Madam Secretary, if you could please announce the next item on today's agenda.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the next item on your agenda will be presented by the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau. It is entitled Review of the Commission's Part 95 Personal Radio Services Rules, Petition for Rulemaking of Garmin International, Inc., Petition for Rulemaking of Omnitronics, LLC. And Neisha Gindelsberger, Acting Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Madam Secretary, Ms. Gindelsberger, whenever you're ready.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners.
Good morning.
Wireless Telecommunication Bureau is pleased to present a report and order that comprehensively updates and modernizes the Part 95 Personal Radio Service Rules. Personal Radio Service Rules allow for a variety of devices that the public can purchase and operate for personal communication needs without having to go through a service provider and usually without having to get to an FCC license. Examples of these devices cover common and simple uses like walkie-talkies, radio-controlled toy cars, boats and planes, hearing assistant devices, and CB radios. These devices also include more complex and life-saving applications like medical implant devices, medical telemetry devices, and personal locator beacons. This order would revise the rules to reflect current uses and technologies, remove outdated regulatory requirements, and organize the rules to make them easier to read and follow. The item will result in a more consistent, clear, and concise set of rules that will better serve the needs of the public. I'm joined at the table by Suzanne Tetreault, Roger Noel, Tom Deringe, and Scott Stone. In addition to the WTB staff seated at the table, I would like to thank our team in the Mobility Division for their hard work on this item, as well as staff from the Office of Engineering and Technology, Enforcement Bureau, Media Bureau, and Office of General Counsel, listed on the slide, for providing their valuable expertise. Tom will present the item.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. I'm pleased to present the Part 95 Personal Radio Service Update Report and Order. Breaker, what's your 1020, good buddy? Not everyone in this room remembers the days before cell phones when there were CB radios in millions of homes and cars across America, but some of us still remember what this early form of personal communications device did to affect our way of life. Just ask the Smokey and the Bandit. CB radio is still a vibrant way for many hobbyists and truckers to communicate, and it is only one of the many services that fall under our Personal Radio Service Rules, or Part 95. Our personal radio service rules allow for a wide variety of devices that the public can purchase and operate for personal communication needs without having to go through a service provider and usually without having to get an FCC license. These devices generally use low-power transmitters, communicate over shared radio frequencies, and use a listen-before-talk etiquette to facilitate sharing in these limited channels. Examples of these devices cover common and simple uses like walkie-talkies, radio-controlled toys, boats, planes, hearing assistance devices, and CB radios. These services also cover more complex and life-saving applications like medical implant devices, medical telemetry devices, and personal locator beacons. In this proceeding, we did a thorough review of all Part 95 rules because many are decades old and contained outdated requirements and are inconsistent with current uses of the services. The item before you would remove any such outdated requirements, update the rules to reflect modern uses of these services, reduce burdens on equipment manufacturers and users, and increase flexibility. It would also streamline and reorganize the rules to make it easier to find information and translate them into plain language format to make the rules easier to read and understand. For example, to increase the flexible use of General Mobile Radio Service, or GMRS, and Family Radio Service, or FRS, which share spectrum in the 460 megahertz band, the item would allot additional channels to both services to maximize the use of this spectrum by using interstitial channels. It would increase the power for FRS from 2 watts from the half watt currently allowed at 462 megahertz channels to reflect the public's demand for longer range devices. It would also modernize our rules to allow GMRS devices to have limited data options, such as GPS location data and short text messages, which is already permitted for FRS on these same channels. These changes will allow many existing FRS-GMRS combination radios that previously required a license to continue to be used under FRS where no license is required, thereby removing the burden to have to get a license for many thousands of Americans. To reduce the burden on GMRS licensees, the item would increase the license term for GMRS from 5 to 10 years. To increase the flexible use of CB radio, the draft clarifies that hands-free headsets are permitted with CB radios and removes a restriction on communicating over long distances when propagation conditions allow such communications. It would also remove outdated and burdensome requirements on CB radio manufacturers, such as requiring crystal control and that serial numbers be engraved on the chassis of CB's radios to reflect how CB radio has evolved over the decades. The draft makes other adjustments to various Part 95 services as requested by commenters to increase the public's options in personal communications devices, reduces burden on equipment manufacturers, and updates our rules to reflect technological and service demand changes. The Bureau recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges to make technical and conforming edits. 10-4, over and out.
Thank you, Mr. Derringe. Teşekkür ederim, Ms. Gundelsberger. We'll now turn to comments from the bench, starting with Commissioner Clyburn.
Thank you. With this item, the Commission updates, reorganizes, and streamlines our Part 95 rules to not only reflect changes in technology, but how personal radio services devices are used by the public. PRS devices are used for a variety of applications, including by hobbyists, remote control model aircraft, those with hearing difficulties, first responders to locate lost persons, medical professionals to retrieve data from implanted medical devices, and of course, by families and groups who use walkie-talkies to communicate. This reorganization results in rules that are clear and easier for consumers to understand. Notably, it makes clear that devices labeled personal locator beacons and maritime survivor locating devices, which are used to aid locating those who are lost or land on water, must meet specified technical standards in order to be marketed as such. This clarification will help ensure that all devices advertised with these terms provide the expected level of emergency location capability. As a former walkie-talkie enthusiast, even though it was short-lived, and a former owner of a CB radio, though I cannot remember my handle, I wish to thank the staff of the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau for your hard work on this item. And Thomas, before this meeting is over, I vow to either come up with my handle or remember it, whichever comes first. Thank you. Well, that's good to hear, Thomas. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Who knew? Wow.
I know.
Learn something new every day.
I know.
It's an interesting picture in my head right now.
Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm fairly certain that when the notice for this item was released back in June 2010, no one ever imagined it would be presented at a commission meeting in May 2017. 7 years later, and no one has a great reason for the delay, though it's clearly not the fault of the staff. This is exactly the type of situation that has caused the chairman and Congress to push for the commission to have deadlines for actions on petitions and notices. Count me in as wholeheartedly supporting that effort, as things shouldn't languish due to inertia. This notwithstanding, I'm generally supportive of today's item to streamline the PRS rules in a manner that should make them more user-friendly. It's always a worthwhile exercise to review and consolidate rules to the extent possible, and it's never bad to judiciously eliminate a few pages in the cumbersome Title 47 of the Code of Federal Regulations. Additionally, the families and others that use the GMRS and family radio service should benefit from the changes we adopt today, such as making additional channels available, providing longer GMRS license terms, and permitting GMRS users to transmit location data and text messages, among others. I appreciate the Chairman's efforts to review the Commission's rules and look forward to future items that seek to modernize Commission rules and reduce regulatory burdens. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. As we've heard, there are a number of citizens band or CB radio codes that are relevant to our work here at the FCC. 1075 means you are causing interference. 1030 means does not conform to FCC rules. And 1011 means something that our wonderful interpreters know that I am guilty of, talking too rapidly. Over the decades, CB radio slang has changed, as has certain commissioners' use of CB radio, apparently. But the FCC's rules in this area still have not. For instance, we still have on the books a requirement that manufacturers engrave on the serial number into the transmitter chassis of each CB radio. And whatever the merits of this rule when it was adopted 40 years ago, those merits have faded into memory, just like BJ and the bear. And the costs of complying with it today greatly exceed any benefit from theft prevention and the like. So today, we reorganize, streamline, and eliminate regulations relating to the personal radio service. These rules govern the use of devices like CB radios, remote-controlled toys, and walkie-talkies. For instance, we consolidate various repetitive sections of our rules into one place where possible. We also reorganize these rules into categories that are easier for the public to understand and easier to find. This modernization effort will help anyone who uses a CB radio or other personal communications device to more easily understand and comply with our rules. Whether you're a truck driver who needs to communicate on the road or a remote control toy enthusiast, you'll be able to put down the engraving pen and the law books and focus on your handle. Thank you to all of those past and present who worked on this item. In particular, thank you to Tom Derringe, Joyce Jones, Gene Cadu, Roger Noel, Matt Pearl, Becky Schwartz, Scott Stone, and Suzanne Tatro in the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, as well as Anisha Gundelsberger, Martin Doxcat, Rashmi Doshi, Tim Harrington, Jameson Prime, and Bruce Romano from the Office of Engineering and Technology, Tom Horan from the Media Bureau, Daniel Meyerson and Steve Spaeth from the Enforcement Bureau, David Horwitz, Keith McCrickard, and Anjali Singh from the Office of General Counsel. And to those who have been calling on the Commission for many years to modernize our rules in this area, I will mimic Tom and simply say 10-4, over and out. We will proceed then to a vote on the item. Commissioner Clyburn?
Aye.
Commissioner Riley?
Aye.
The chair votes aye as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges granted as requested. Thanks to the Bureau for the presentation. And Madam Secretary, if you could please announce the next item on today's agenda.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the fourth item on your agenda will be presented by the Media Bureau and is entitled Commission Launches Modernization of Media Regulation Initiative, and Michelle Carey, Acting Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Today, the Media Bureau presents a public notice that begins a top-to-bottom review of the Commission's media regulations. Media entities in today's marketplace are subject to a multitude of rules, many of which are decades old. The proceeding we launched today is intended to identify those rules that are outdated, unnecessary, or unduly burdensome for broadcast stations, cable operators, and satellite providers. Our goal is to eliminate or modify those rules to foster more competition, innovation, and investment in the marketplace to the benefit of American consumers. Joining me at the table are Mary Beth Murphy, Martha Heller, and Raylyn Remy of the Media Bureau. Raylyn will present the item.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, we are pleased to present this public notice that launches a review of the Commission's rules applicable to media entities, including television and radio broadcasters, cable operators, and satellite television providers. Rules that are outdated or impose unnecessary regulatory burdens can stand in the way of greater competition, innovation, and investment in the marketplace. The proceeding we initiate today is intended to ensure that only those rules that are relevant and necessary remain on the books. To that end, the public notice seeks input from affected parties, including small businesses, as to which rules should be modified or repealed as part of this review. We will take such input into consideration in determining whether to propose eliminating or changing rules in subsequent rulemaking proceedings. Through this review, the Commission takes another step toward modernizing its rules to the benefit of American businesses and consumers. The Media Bureau recommends that the Commission adopt this public notice and requests editorial privileges to make any necessary technical or conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Reby. We'll turn to comments from the bench. Commissioner Clyburn.
Thank you. The purpose of a public notice should be to gather information and build a record before drawing conclusions. Yet it seems in the case of this PN, the FCC's majority starts with the premise that advancing the public interest can only be achieved by clearing the books of rules for the benefit of industry. To be clear, I have no objection to reviewing the Commission's rules, making a determination if a valid objective remains for a given regulation, and concluding that there is a better, more efficient way to achieve a particular goal for the benefit of stakeholders, consumers, and the Commission. This is, in fact, what the Commission is required to do as part of its biennial review. Section 11 of the Communications Act of 1934 specifically instructs the Commission to determine whether any such regulation is no longer necessary in the public interest as a result of meaningful economic competition between providers of such service. Today's PN turns that mandate on its head by ignoring the basic question of whether the regulations subject to this review remain in the public interest. It assumes that to advance the public interest, we must reduce unnecessary regulations and undue regulatory burdens. Thus, it seems the word modernization, as this proceeding has been ironically named, is just really code for deregulation at the expense of the American consumer. Let me explain what I mean by sharing a few glaring examples of Commission rules that pertain to the audio and video marketplaces and why they remain important today. Our equal opportunity rules require broadcasters and MVPDs of a certain size to maintain an EEO recruitment program. These rules also prohibit discrimination in hiring. As the Multicultural Media, Telecom, and Internet Council recently noted, EEO compliance is essentially the only public service the Commission requests of radio stations and one of the very few public services required of television stations and MVPDs. Perhaps some stations or MVPDs find the record-keeping and reporting requirements burdensome, but that does not negate the importance of these rules to the public interest. Similarly, one industry insider recently suggested that as part of this review, the Commission should make broadcast ownership reporting every 4 years rather than every 2 years. Not only is the information contained in these reports vital to enhancing viewpoint diversity, the Third Circuit has explicitly told us we need better data on minority and female ownership. Less frequent data collection would do absolutely nothing to further these objectives. Yet another example is the Commission's rules governing competitive access to cable programming and the regulation of carriage agreements. As someone who has heard from countless independent programmers about challenges they face in gaining carriage, we should be strengthening our rules, not eliminating or weakening those protections that are currently on the books. Now, some may claim that I am overreacting, and that the Commission's majority will ultimately conclude that many of these critical rules further the public interest and should be preserved. But I believe it is important to sound the alarm and remind my colleagues that our job is to protect the public interest, not give perpetual hall passes to big broadcast and cable companies. Finally, where the majority concludes that regulations should be eliminated, it is my sincere hope that this will result in the freeing up of agency resources to actually enforce the rules that remain on the books. This could include program access and carriage complaints, compliance with children's pro-educational television reporting, and allegations of redlining. While I disagree with the premise of this PM and will therefore respectfully dissent, I thank the staff of the Media Bureau for hearing my concerns, as well as for your tireless efforts over the years to promote localism, competition, and viewpoint diversity.
Thank you, Commissioner Clyburn. Commissioner O'Reilly.
This item exemplifies the Commission's newfound openness to stakeholder input and its shift towards reality-based decision-making. As been noted by myself and others, our regulations in the media space are strewn with anachronisms more appropriate for a different set of circumstances. A wholesale review is necessary and indeed long overdue. So I support this initiative and fully expect that it will generate some quick results to follow on to our previous successes in the space. Broadcasters, cable operators, and other media stakeholders I have spoken with are very familiar with my calls for ideas about specific regulations that are outdated and no longer necessary. In the previous commission, I was able to champion these changes that were suggested to me and get them moving in one form or another. Now we're opening this entire proceeding, and the entire commission stands ready to hear your ideas and act on them, which is a refreshing change of pace. The Commission should not be in the business of generating busy work or collecting reams of data no one ever looks at. Since the beginning of the year, I've already heard a number of ideas that I'm hopeful could be implemented as part of this process, including updates of many of our reporting requirements. For example, all TV stations are required to file an ancillary TV report annually regarding the 5% DTV ancillary fee. This report must be filed even if the answer, as is often the case, is simply no fee due. This form can and should be eliminated for parties that do not owe a fee. Similarly, Form 397 requires simply a name and a copy of the annual EEO reports for the last 2 years. But now the EEO reports are filed with the Commission in the party's online public files. This form is duplicative. That does not change the EEO reports themselves. Notification requirements are another area where many updates should be made now that so much communication has gone digital. For example, our rules often require broadcasters to give public notice of certain applications in local newspapers. But with newspaper circulation often dwarfed by the broadcaster's own audience or non-existent in some localities, these notices would be much more effectively given on a station's website. Our rules also require broadcasters to send notices of their decisions to opt in to retransmission consent versus must carry to cable operators via snail mail, a process that could be more easily accomplished online. These and other ideas now will have an effective fast track for consideration and, if appropriate, action. I certainly will do my part to help attain consensus and move as many forward as possible. And I thank the Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Reilly. A few years ago, early in my tenure at the Commission, we voted to forbear from enforcing a regulation first adopted by the FCC's Telegraph Division in 1936. That rule was originally intended to address issues with claims against telegraph carriers arising from errors in or delayed delivery or non-delivery of messages and money orders. I marveled at the time that 77 years later, that rule still remained on the books. And that proceeding made me keenly aware of a fundamental truth. One of the most powerful forces in government is regulatory inertia. A rule that might have been necessary at one time can become yellowed and obsolete with age. In some cases, repeal of such a rule is just a matter of good housekeeping. The conduct covered by the rule simply doesn't happen anymore, so the rule is literally irrelevant. In other cases, repeal is a necessity. The rule stands in the way of innovation and investment that would benefit consumers. This applies to the FCC's media regulations, or at least it should. By comparison, every 2 years, as Commissioner Clyburn pointed out, the FCC undertakes what is known as a biennial review. In Section 11 of the Communications Act, Congress told us to consider all regulations that apply to telecommunications services. And if we determine that any such regulation is no longer necessary in the public interest as a result of meaningful economic competition between providers of such service, we then must repeal or modify it. Now, the Act doesn't require us to review similarly our media rules, but that doesn't mean we can't, and hence this public notice. The goal here is simple, and it is the same as it is with our biennial review. That is, we want to figure out, with respect to our media regulations, whether and how to update our rules to match the realities of today's marketplace. We aim to get public input on which rules are still necessary and which should be modified or eliminated. We want to modernize our rules in order to better promote the public interest and clear a path for more competition, innovation, and investment in the media sector. This is simply good government. Now, in order for this effort to be successful, we will need your help. And so I encourage all interested parties to file comments in this proceeding and to bring to our attention rules that deserve the Commission's consideration. My thanks, along with my colleagues, to the Media Bureau's terrific staff for putting together this public notice. Michelle Carey, Martha Heller, Mary Beth Murphy, and Raylan Remy. In your efforts to come, you may not dig up a dictate as dated as the Telegraph Division rule I mentioned, but your work is critically important nonetheless. And with that, we'll proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner Clyburn? Nay. Commissioner O'Reilly?
Aye.
The chair votes aye. The ayes have it. The item is adopted with editorial privileges granted as requested. Madam Secretary, if you could please announce the next item on today's agenda.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the fifth item on your agenda will also be presented by the Media Bureau and is entitled Elimination of Main Studio Rule. And Michelle Carey, Acting Chief of the Bureau, will again give the introduction.
Secretary, Michelle, if you could please report.
Thank you. The next item the Media Bureau presents is a notice of proposed rulemaking that proposes to reduce costs and regulatory burdens for broadcasters by eliminating the main studio rule. This rule requires each AM, FM, and television broadcast station to have a main studio located in or near its local community. The notice proposes to eliminate existing requirements associated with the main studio rule, including the requirement that the main studio have full-time management and staff during normal business hours and be able to originate programming. Joining me at the table are Holly Sauer, Martha Heller, and Diana Sokolow of the Media Bureau. Diana will present the item. Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, I am pleased to present this Notice of Proposed Rulemaking seeking comment on the proposal to eliminate the main studio rule and the associated staffing and program origination capability requirements. As discussed in the notice, we tentatively conclude that the technological innovations have rendered a local studio requirement unnecessary. When the Commission first conceived the main studio rule more than 70 years ago, the intention was to facilitate input from community members and stations' participation in community activities. Today, in contrast, widespread availability of electronic communication enables members of the community to contact broadcast radio and television stations, and stations to participate in their local communities without the physical presence of a local broadcast studio. In addition, as a result of the FCC's online public inspection file requirements, community members no longer will need to visit a station's main studio to access its public inspection file. Television stations have already transitioned to the online public file, and radio stations will complete their transition by early 2018. The notice proposes that the Commission retain the current rule that requires each AM, FM, television, and Class A television broadcast station to maintain a local telephone number in its community of license or a toll-free telephone number. Such a requirement could ensure that members of the community continue to have access to their local broadcast stations if the main studio requirements are eliminated and the stations choose to relocate their main studios. We believe that eliminating the main studio rule and the associated staffing and program origination requirements would eliminate a burden on broadcasters that is no longer necessary. The Media Bureau recommends that the Commission adopt the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking and requests editorial privileges to make any necessary technical or conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sokolow. We'll now turn to comments from the bench. Commissioner Clyburn.
For years, you've heard me speak about the unique role broadcasters play in local communities. NAB President and CEO Gordon Smith reinforced this view in his 2012 congressional testimony by saying that localism underpins each of our FCC licenses. Our stations demonstrate their commitment to this promise in times of every emergency, reminding us of broadcasters' important role as first informers. So I find it perplexing that those very same broadcasters are advocating to absolve themselves from maintaining local roots in their community of license. A broadcaster's main studio is often the only physical tie to a community. Broadcasters are often among the first to report an emergency, and when it comes to radio, that physical presence means they actually know and are experiencing and are interacting firsthand with what their listeners want and need to hear. By tentatively proposing to eliminate the Commission's main studio rule, however, it seems to me that we are embracing a world in which automated national programming is the new normal. When the community wants to know what is going on in their backyard, my question is, will simulcasting fill the gap? Now, I understand the economic challenges facing many stations, particularly in small and mid-sized markets. And if the elimination of the main studio rule is what gives that small market station with just 5 or fewer employees the chance to keep the lights on and continue producing local programming, then I am empathetic. But we need to think long and hard about the practical implications of eliminating this rule altogether. While it is true that with the public file now accessible online, members of the public have one less reason to visit a station's main studio. And yes, a local or toll-free telephone number is a good thing. But if nobody is there to answer that call, and the only option is to leave a voicemail, how often will that voice system be checked? When will that call be returned? And who is going to report if, heaven forbid, there is, say, a train derailment and hazardous chemicals are spilled, jeopardizing the safety of the surrounding community? This was indeed the case back in 2002 during the Minot train derailment, when it took several hours to locate station managers. I thank Chairman Pai for hearing my concerns and including a series of questions focusing on whether eliminating the main studio rule will impact a station's ability to communicate time-sensitive or emergency information to the public. The NPRM also asked at my request whether a station's phone number should be staffed during the hours in which that station is on the air. This would provide a means for the public and local officials to communicate life-saving information during an emergency. I am also grateful for the inclusion of questions on what impact elimination of this rule would have on LPFM and non-commercial stations. So while I admit that I remain skeptical about moving forward with an outright elimination of this rule, I believe that the NPRM tees up the appropriate questions needed to build a fulsome record. For these reasons, I will vote to approve today's NPRM. My thanks once again go to the staff of the Media Bureau for working with me to ensure that broadcasters remain a core part of every local community in this country.
Thank you, Commissioner Clyburn. Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With this item, the Commission makes a much-needed move towards eliminating an unnecessary requirement on our nation's broadcasters that restricts their ability to make decisions and allocate resources in a way that best serves their audiences. I've long contended that the main studio rule was ripe for elimination, but for so long it has seemed that the Commission's mindset was stuck in a bygone era when it came to the media marketplace. When it was implemented, this rule may have been the only available means to ensure that local broadcasters would remain engaged and responsive to their communities. Now, however, with multiple electronic means communications available, we overwhelmingly have other means to do so. The old rationale has dissolved, leaving the rule usefulness mostly questionable at best. It intended to only for micromanagement and potentially gotcha setups of its licensees. Notwithstanding any main studio rule, broadcasters are ever focused on serving the needs of their local listeners and viewers because it is the only proven way to ensure station success. So I thank the Chairman for putting forth this proposal, and I'm hopeful we can bring the proceeding to a decisive conclusion in the very near future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Reilly. The first commercial radio broadcast in the United States took place on November 2nd, 1920, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. That night, KDKA reported the results of the presidential election between Warren Harding and James Cox. The studio used for that broadcast was a tiny makeshift wooden shack on top of the Westinghouse Company's plant in East Pittsburgh. And broadcast studios have changed a lot over the last 90-plus years, including KDKA's, which I've had the privilege to visit. And so too have the purposes that a studio serves. And that brings us to the FCC's main studio rule. As was observed, the FCC first conceived the main studio rule almost 80 years ago. The rule requires each AM, FM, and television broadcast station to maintain a main studio located in or near its community of license. And back then, perhaps it made sense for the reasons explained during Ms. Sokolow's presentation. But today, the rule appears outdated, unnecessary, and unduly burdensome. Community access and engagement remain important in the digital era, but technology has rendered physical studios unnecessary for those purposes. That's because such activities are much more likely to occur via social media, email, or phone, rather than through an in-person visit to a broadcast studio. Furthermore, broadcasters have shown that the main studio rule is a continuous cost that keeps them from serving their local communities in meaningful ways, like broadcasting additional local programming. Recently, a broadcaster in Minnesota wrote to me saying that this archaic rule has outlived its usefulness. He added that he would like to build out his construction permit for an AM station in a nearby town, but that the main studio rule, as he put it, is a killer. The cost to maintain a staff, it would simply make the construction of this facility a ticket of doom. Now, unfortunately, despite his belief that he would be able to air meaningful local content without a main studio, it appears that the cost of complying with the rule may make it hard for him to extend service to that nearby community. And so the proceeding we begin today could grant this broadcaster and all others affected by the rule the flexibility to use their limited resources in a way that best serves their local communities. Today's notice is an important step toward bringing the media rules of the FCC into the digital age. And for that, we have Michelle Carey, Martha Heller, Holly Sauer, and Diane Sokolow from the Media Bureau to thank. We will continue to rely on your expertise in the time to come as we aim to modernize our media rules to reflect today's marketplace. And with that, we'll proceed to vote on the item. Commissioner Clyburn? Commissioner O'Reilly?
Aye.
Chair votes aye as well. The ayes have it. The item is adopted with editorial privileges granted as requested. Madam Secretary, if you could please announce the next item on today's agenda.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the sixth item on your agenda today will be presented by the Wireline Competition Bureau and is entitled Restoring Internet Freedom.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Oh, sorry.
Did I say it wrong? Okay. Chris Monteith, Acting Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Ms. Monteith, whenever you're ready, feel free to proceed.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The Wireline Competition Bureau presents for your consideration a notice of proposed rulemaking that would take the first step toward returning to the successful bipartisan framework that supported a flourishing, free, and open Internet for almost 20 years. By proposing to end the utility-style regulation of the Internet, today's notice is a first step in preserving the future of Internet freedom and promoting infrastructure investment, innovation, and consumer choice. I would like to thank the dedicated staff of the Wireline Competition Bureau and the Office of General Counsel for their contributions to this item. Seated with me at the table are Madeline Finley, Deputy Chief of the Wireline Competition Bureau, Dan Kahn, Chief of the Competition Policy Division, Christine Fargetstein, Legal Advisor in the Wireline Competition Bureau, and Nathan Egan, Attorney Advisor in the Telecommunications Access and Policy Division. Nathan will now present the item.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The notice of proposed rulemaking that we present today proposes to end the FCC's public utility regulation of the Internet and seeks comment on returning to the bipartisan, light-touch regulatory framework that saw the free and open Internet flourish prior to the 2015 adoption of the Title II order. There are several key elements to the notice. First, the notice proposes to end Title II regulation of the Internet and return broadband Internet access service to its classification as an information service. The notice examines the text, structure, and history of the Communications Act, the technical details of how the Internet works, the Commission's precedent, and the Commission's goal of benefiting consumers through innovation, investment, and competition. Second, the notice proposes to reinstate the determination that mobile broadband Internet access service is not a commercial mobile service, and to return it to its original classification as a private mobile service. In conjunction with this proposal, the notice proposes to revisit the elements of the Title II order that modified or reinterpreted key terms in Section 332 of the Communications Act and the Commission's implementing rules. Third, the notice proposes to eliminate the general conduct standard and the non-exhaustive list of factors intended to guide application of the rule. The notice also specifically seeks comment on whether the Commission should keep, modify, or eliminate the bright-line rules set forth in the Title II order. The Bureau recommends adoption of this notice and requests editorial privileges extending only to technical and conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Regan. We'll now turn to comments from the bench. Commissioner Clyburn.
Mr. Chairman, I will have a longer statement for the record, but at this time I wish to share a few impressions about WC docket number 17108. Last Wednesday, I took part in a public listening session in Skid Row. For those unfamiliar, Skid Row is a Los Angeles community housing one of the largest homeless populations in the United States. It was there I met a fascinating woman who calls herself Frenchie. She would stop me about 3 times over the course of the evening, first going on about how much I looked like my picture. Now, we all know that that was not true, but, I love her anyway. Next, letting me know how happy she was that someone like me would not only visit, but listen. but the third time turned out to be the most telling. I was moments away, to be honest, from politely but firmly asking to be excused, because it was the third time we talked, when Frenchie said something that made me pause. When she was without a home in the traditional sense, she was able to secure an address, a stable, personal email address, which helped to ground her and enabled her to keep in touch with the world through the power of the internet. That continuity, that identity, that stable electronic footprints was at times the only permanent presence she had when much in her physical life was in turmoil. She got through the hardest of times, she said, thanks to an open internet, because those very same connections led her to the services that appear to be providing her a more stable life. I also heard from Marco that night. The former filmmaker lost his family, his livelihood, and for a time struggled with mental illness. He lived in Skid Row, but the doctor who made the greatest headway with his recovery was more than 200 miles away in Fresno. Rather than having to spend hours on public transportation, he was able to Skype with his therapist, and along with a friend from Argentina who spoke his language and a clinician who was willing to pronounce his name correctly, he has gotten through the hardest of times thanks to the power of an open internet. Denise, an artist, writer, and mother of 6, felt separated from the world because of the challenges of being a stay-at-home mom. She first turned to blogging as an avenue of expression, but that blog would eventually become a retail outlet for her artistic work, as well as a source of income that has enabled her and her husband to support their family, thanks to the power of an open internet. These are just 3 of the millions of examples of those whose lives have been uplifted by one of the most enabling platforms for speech, commerce, and innovation of our time. Like the nearly 4 million voices who weighed in on the previous proceeding just over 2 years ago, these 3 individuals asked me to tell this agency to keep the internet open and free. We can get hung up on semantics, debate classification, or whether the internet is a luxury, but broadband is a necessity in the 21st century, and access to it allows the most vulnerable among us to hold on during our darkest moments and lift ourselves up to a brighter tomorrow. For those who are fortunate enough to have broadband access at home and do not have to trek to the library and wait for a free terminal, or troll for free Wi-Fi on the street corners or in fast food establishments, not only are you fortunate, but you know that it is among the first of your utilities that you make sure is working right after electricity and water. And just what does one expect when you get connected? That you can run your online business, access content over the internet, and exercise free speech without your service provider or anyone else getting in the way. Those expectations, it pains me to say, are now at risk. Today's notice of proposed rulemaking, more appropriately, it should be known as the Destroying Internet Freedom NPRM, if ratified, would deeply damage the ability of the FCC to be a champion of consumers and competition in the 21st century. It contains a hollow theory of trickle-down internet economics, suggesting that if we just remove enough regulations from your broadband provider, they will automatically improve your service, pass along discounts from those speculative savings, deploy more infrastructure with haste, and treat edge providers fairly. It contains ideological interpretive whiplash, boldly proposing to gut the very same consumer and competitive protections that have been twice upheld by the courts. And it contains an approach to broadband that will throw universal service money to broaden its reach, but abandon users when something goes wrong, particularly if they are faced with anti-competitive or anti-consumer practices. It jeopardizes the ability of the open internet to function tomorrow as it does today. But if you unequivocally trust that your broadband provider will always put the public interest over self-interest or the interest of their stockholders, then the Destroying Internet Freedom NPRM is for you. I find it ironic, however, that many of the voices who support this item, including the majority at the Commission, said that it should be Congress's place to decide the future of broadband regulation. If that is so, then why are we here today? Just why is it that the majority proposes to undo a twice affirmed classification and twice affirmed rules? Is it so Congress can act? A vacuous assertion. What I find particularly troubling is that this proposal has the potential to damage our authority to provide broadband for the poorest and most remotely located Americans, unless the underlying goal is to actually weaken our ability to support broadband through our universal service programs. I most vociferously dissent from this NPRM because it has very indicia of a political rush job. Let me say that again. I most vociferously dissent from this NPRM because it has every indicia of a political rush job. Month after month, I listen to repeated calls from the current leadership about how economic analyses were missing from the last administration's items, how troubling that was, and because of the absence of any analysis, that we were jeopardizing our ability to make sound decisions. But unless I missed it, and I would welcome a correction if I am in error, there was no FCC economist or technologist consulted during the drafting of this item. If they were, and I majored in banking and finance and economics, but I admittedly have been out of practice for a number of years, I cannot find any evidence of it, given the dearth of economic and technical depth in this NPRM. The only real factual question about the effects of the 2015 Open Internet Order that the majority keeps trying to drive home is their assertion that it has harmed investment. But the NPRM presents at most 1/3 of the economic picture of the market. You see, from reading the item, it would be reasonable to assume that the key open internet policy question is whether a policy increases or decreases broadband provider capital expenditures. It is a relevant question, but the only econometric analysis that the majority cites for support clearly states that it is inappropriate to use investment as a policy objective. Even if I accepted the majority's premise that the key question is investment, the analysis fails to take into account what entrepreneurs invest in their internet business, what risk venture capitalists plow into the internet and telecom market, and what consumers pay for and how they use all of these services to create economic value. It even fails to account for broadband investments made beyond narrow capital expenditures, including spectrum purchases and M&A, both of which are indicia of a robust and profitable market for broadband services. The majority seems willfully blind to these aspects of broadband investment. And even if we were to ignore all those points and narrowly focus on the affirmative case that the majority puts forth, it is lackluster at best. As I have mentioned previously, I have yet to see a credible analysis that suggests that broadband provider capital expenditures have declined as a result of our 2015 Open Internet Order. But of course, that does not keep those dead set on dismantling open internet protections as we know them from repeating the same tired, unproven talking points. The most recent analysis on the market actually suggests that total capital investment by publicly traded ISPs or internet service providers was up 5% since the 2015 Open Internet Order was adopted. Edge investments up. Broadband revenues up. This trend makes perfect sense since no broadband provider has ever told Wall Street, has ever told the Security and Exchange Commission that the 2015 Open Internet Order was responsible for decreases in capital expenditures. So just why do we appear to be stuck in a literal he said, she said exchange on this issue? One analyst articulates that it is impossible to tell whether the open internet rules have affected investment. There is no way to provide a serious answer that rises above simply trying to reverse engineer the answer you want to find. There simply has not been enough market experience with this framework in order to tell what caused what. So what then should we look to for answers? With all of the assertions about how burdensome and draconian the current framework is, what should be instructive is that the Title II framework that the FCC adopted for broadband in 2015 was actually less intrusive than the one that was applied to mobile voice in the early 1990s. Now, we all know how much of a bust the wireless industry has been, right? Between 1993 and 2009, the mobile industry invested more than $271 billion in building out networks. During that same time period, industry revenues increased by 1,300%, and subscribership grew over 1,600%. So answer this. Why is it that the leadership is now proposing to get rid of what is essentially the same legal framework that we know was highly successful as a driver in the mobile industry context? What is becoming increasingly clear is this: that the majority is willing to read the definition of a telecommunications service out of the Communications Act entirely, not just for broadband, but for all consumer telecommunications services. Now, why do I assert this? Show me one modern consumer service that the majority will unequivocally say is a telecommunications service and that its provider should be regulated as a common carrier. Broadband, voice over IP, VoLTE, messaging, all of these, I suspect, the majority will say are either unequivocally or most likely information services. There is much sound and fury about applying the Communications Act to modern communication services, but none about applying the revolutionary era First Amendment to speech on the Internet. The point is this: technology-neutral definitions do not, or it saddens me to say in this context, should not ever become obsolete by advances in technology. But let me turn to broadband specifically. Those in lockstep with the majority seem to be on board, at least so far, with the whiplash about face on Title II and net neutrality. But they are forgetting that their lodestar for constitutional and statutory interpretation will conclude that they are engaging in interpretive jiggery-pokery. The late Justice Antonin Scalia's guiding framework for legal interpretation was that laws should be interpreted based on their actual text and original public meaning. But how quickly they forget when it comes to an issue where they have a preferred policy outcome that diverges from rigorous textualism. Remember, we have seen this and we have been here before. The FCC went before the Supreme Court in 2005, remember, when it attempted to classify cable broadband as an information service. The majority of the court felt that such an interpretation was within the interpretive discretion of the FCC, but not Justice Scalia. In his withering dissent in NCTA versus Brand X, he accused the Commission of attempting to, and I quote, concoct a whole new regime of regulation under the guise of statutory construction. In its attempt to achieve this scheme of non-regulation, done so through an implausible reading of the statute. Congress, in its wisdom, tied many of our competition and consumer protection functions to the nature of the service being offered. And indeed, those services are changing, but the underlying transmission remains largely the same. Innovation has and will continue. We have moved from copper to glass and from circuit switching to packet switching. But using interpretive gymnastics to shirk competition and consumer protection responsibilities is the antithesis of putting consumers first. We should not let broadband providers define the rules of engagement when Congress has clearly instructed the Federal Communications Commission with that responsibility. And just to make it absolutely clear that this is an ends justified rather than a legally justified proceeding, one need only to look at the toll-free numbering database for answers. That database is a tariffed common carrier service. If mass market broadband, which transmits data across the globe in the blink of an eye, is not a common carrier service and numbering database access is, this clarification exercise is just an expedition into whimsical absurdity. In sum, it simply makes no sense in the era of the 21st century connectivity to say that we are not dealing with a telecommunications service. Just what are consumers purchasing when they sign up for broadband, if not the ability to transmit and receive? The majority claims it has an eye towards the future, but both feet, I'm sad to say, are firmly stuck in the past, harkening back to the dial-up days where a subscriber purchased both a basic TDM telephony service and a separate dial-up service in order to access the internet. No matter that most of us no longer use dial-up to access the internet, no matter that consumers buy broadband because all the information services they want to access and use require a broadband subscription as a necessary prerequisite, but I should not be surprised that the majority is peering through a lens of yesteryear, for we just revived a 1985 technologically obsolete UHF discount, so why not continue to wind back the clock and base our regulatory structure on a 1990s version of the Internet? As far as the open Internet rules go, this is Schrodinger's NPRM. The text devoted to the open Internet rules is so open-ended that the rules are both alive and dead until the Commission adopts an order in this proceeding. Will any of the open Internet rules survive this rulemaking? I am doubtful, given both the tenor of the questioning and the fact that the rulemaking is proposing to get rid of the only authority that would underpin strong open Internet rules. Tellingly, the majority does not propose any provision of law to underpin any of the open Internet rules on which it seeks comment. In fact, it proposes to reinterpret the one provision that has served as a basis of even limited broadband regulation. Of course, I am talking about Section 706 of the Telecommunications Act of 1996. While paying lip service to the idea that we should ground open Internet rules in other forms as statutory authority, like Section 230B, which the Comcast Court rejected, I am also concerned at the proposal to reinterpret Section 706 as merely hortatory. We have litigated the statutory history, and the courts have upheld our use of Section 706 as a substantive grant of authority, walking that interpretation back, particularly in a world where we do not have Title II, is a sure death sentence for any open internet rules. While the majority engages in flowery rhetoric about light touch regulation and so on and so forth, the end game appears to be no touch regulation and a wholesale destruction of the FCC's public interest authority in the 21st century, undermining the ability of poor people to get broadband, kneecapping funding for rural telecommunications, declining to review an $85 billion transaction with massive public interest implications, encouraging consolidation and higher prices in business broadband, and enabling massive broadcasting conglomerates to gobble up more local voices. Each action is a cut against the public interest, and the majority will keep it coming unless Americans stand up, make their voices heard, and challenge the FCC in court, because it is glaringly obvious with each open meeting that the willingness and ability of the majority to protect consumers and competition in a broadband era has come to a screeching halt. Nonetheless, I thank the staff of the Wireline Bureau and the Office of General Counsel for their hard work on this item. I may think this rulemaking is a horrible path to go down, but your hard work should be recognized regardless. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Clyburn. I'll mark you down as a no on this one, I think.
Be safe.
Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today, we formally initiate the proceeding to consider reversing the 2015 net neutrality order. I dissented from that prior decision because I was not persuaded, based on the record before us, that there was evidence of harm to businesses or consumers that warranted the adoption of net neutrality rules, much less the imposition of heavy-handed Title II regulation on broadband providers. Now we are commencing a new proceeding, and I will fully fulfill my obligations under the Administrative Procedures Act. While I certainly have my views on the topic, I restate my approach to look to the law, the necessity for any rules, and record of substantive comments that accumulates. Thankfully, our rulemaking proceeding is not decided like a Dancing with the Stars contest, since counts of comments submitted have only so much value. At the outset, I want to commend the chairman for his leadership and staff for their excellent work on this item. This proceeding is being conducted in an open and transparent manner, and all interested parties will have a full and fair opportunity to present comments, data, and analysis. One of the reasons why I welcome the opportunity to revisit these rules is that the prior commission changed course so abruptly that it did not take the time to sufficiently examine the law and record and did not adequately respond to opposing viewpoints and alternative proposals. This time, I am confident that whether you agree or disagree on the need for net neutrality rules or our legal authority, you will see an order that fully and fairly responds to all substantive arguments. To help bring order and rigor to the debate to come, the notice proposes to conduct an actual cost-benefit analysis. This is a critical improvement. Instead of operating in an economics-free zone where the benefits of the rules are assumed to outweigh any costs, commenters will need to provide evidence to support their arguments that the rules are, or are not, needed. It will enable the Commission to ground its decision in fact rather than in hypotheticals. The notice also asks for a range of questions on the proper legal classification of broadband Internet access service. These include critical questions that should have been explored and answered by the Commission before it barreled down the Title II path, disavowing decades of precedent and contrary interpretations that stood in the way. Now the Commission presents the case that it previously ignored, that the text of the Act, Commission precedent, and public policy support classification of broadband Internet access service as an information service. My primary goal with respect to this notice has been to ensure that the Commission asks sufficient questions to lay the groundwork for a legally sustainable final decision. Accordingly, any issue that is related to this proceeding and could be part of the decision should be on the table here. One such issue concerns jurisdiction over broadband Internet access service. If the Commission decides that it is an interstate information service, then states and localities should be foreclosed from regulating it, as some states are currently attempting to do with new broadband privacy laws, fees, approval process, and other requirements. I thank the Chairman for working with me by including a question to enable parties to submit comments and proposals on the issue. I vote to approve. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Reilly. For nearly 2 decades, the Internet flourished under a bipartisan, light-touch regulatory framework. In the span of recent memory, the Internet went from a university research project to an essential tool for participating in the modern world. This success wasn't an accident. In 1996, President Clinton signed the Telecommunications Act of 1996 and established a national policy to preserve the vibrant and competitive free market that presently exists for the Internet, unfettered by federal or state regulation. In 1998, Senators Ron Wyden and John Kerry, among others, said that if the FCC, quote, suddenly subjected some or all information service providers to telephone regulation, it would seriously chill the growth and development of advanced services. The very next year, Democratic FCC Chairman Bill Kennard said that, quote, it is not good for America to just pick up this whole morass of Title II telephone regulation and dump it wholesale on the Internet pipe. And this wasn't controversial. This was the consensus. And so it would remain for almost 2 decades. Under this light-touch approach, the private sector invested in networks to the tune of $1.5 trillion. Internet speeds accelerated from kilobits to gigabits per second. Mobile connectivity expanded from 1G to 2G to 3G to 4G and even beyond. And an entire Internet economy sprung up to develop applications riding on those networks. Online companies like Google, Facebook, Netflix, and Amazon grew from scratch to become global powerhouses. In sum, we had a free and open Internet, one in which consumers reaped immense benefits. The Internet was not broken in 2015. We were not living in a digital dystopia. Nonetheless, the FCC that year succumbed to partisan pressure from the White House and changed course. Even though the FCC couldn't find any evidence of market failure, it turned its back on almost 2 decades of success. It imposed upon all Internet service providers, or ISPs, big and small, the heavy-handed regulatory framework designed during the Roosevelt administration to micromanage the AT&T telephone monopoly. These utility-style regulations, known as Title II, were and are like the proverbial sledgehammer being wielded against the flea, except that here, there was no flea. As a result of these rules, small ISPs faced new regulatory burdens associated with common carrier compliance. Innovative providers, hoping to offer their consumers new, even free services, had to fear Washington bureaucracy that might disapprove and take enforcement action against them. With the possibility of broadband rate regulation looming on the horizon, companies investing in next-generation networks hesitated to build or expand networks, unsure if the government would let them compete in the free market. Today, we propose to repeal utility-style regulation of the Internet. We propose to return to the Clinton-era light-touch framework that has been proven to be so successful. And we propose to put technologists and engineers, rather than lawyers and accountants, at the center of the online world. The evidence so far strongly suggests that this is the right way to go. Among our nation's 12 largest Internet service providers, domestic broadband capital expenditures decreased by 5.6%, or $3.6 billion between 2014 and 2016, the first 2 years of the Title II era. Now, just to give you some context, this decline is extremely unusual. It is the first time that such investment has declined outside of a recession in the Internet era. To be sure, a study released by a pro-Title II special interest this week claimed that there had been no such decline. But that report makes basic mistakes, like counting network investment in Mexico as network investment in the United States. Now, this investment pullback is affecting smaller ISPs as well. We've received letters from dozens of small ISPs explaining how Title II hurts them and their consumers. 70 fixed wireless Internet service providers say, and I quote, "Our challenges are exacerbated by the Title II order, which has significantly increased compliance burdens and regulatory risk through heavy-handed regulation that is rife with uncertainty. 7, smaller mobile wireless providers tell us that the uncertainty surrounding the Title II regulatory framework for wireless broadband services hinders our ability to meet our customers' needs, burdens our companies with unnecessary and costly obligations, and inhibits our ability to build and operate networks in rural America. 22 of the nation's smallest ISPs report that they have slowed, if not halted, the development and deployment of innovative new service offerings. 32 additional rural ISPs point to the bureaucratic straitjacket of outdated regulations known as Title II as a barrier to the vigorous investment they want to pursue. And perhaps most notably, 19 nonprofit municipal ISPs, that is, government-owned broadband providers, often championed by Title II advocates, observe that for the past 2 years, the substantial costs of the 2015 decisions have harmed our businesses. Now, consider for a moment why these statements are so important. These are 150 small ISPs, most of which Americans have never heard of. These are the very companies that are critical to injecting competition into the broadband marketplace. These are the very companies that are critical to closing the digital divide by building out in lower-income rural and urban areas that all too often don't see investment at all or are the first to see investment dry up. And again, these are the very companies telling us that Title II makes it harder for them to connect Americans with digital opportunity. It puts consumers last, not first, to push these companies out of the marketplace and to stifle competition. Now, in addition to proposing to reverse the Title II classification, we are also proposing to eliminate the so-called Internet Conduct Standard. This standard gives the FCC a roving mandate to review business models and prohibit service plans that benefit consumers. With this expansive authority, the FCC could investigate any provider for offering the public virtually any service that the agency might find problematic. And that's in fact what the FCC did. Within months of conferring this newfound authority upon itself, the FCC met the enemy: consumer-friendly free data programs offered by several wireless companies. Despite the then leadership of the agency having deemed some of these programs, quote, highly innovative and competitive, the FCC began investigating them. Preventing consumers from getting something for free doesn't benefit consumers. Additionally, this authority lets bureaucrats question whether literally every network management decision is reasonable. And this is especially unwise when it comes to the networks of the future. Consider 5G, the fifth generation of wireless, for instance. The Economist magazine recently explained what this technology will require: slicing the network into multiple logical networks, each optimized for a different user's needs. Now, having to hire lawyers to make sure your engineers don't run afoul of the FCC while pulling that off sounds like a recipe for disaster. And that helps explain why Mark Andreessen, the famed entrepreneur, the creator of the Netscape browser, and a prominent Silicon Valley venture capitalist, has said, and I quote, "If you have these pure net neutrality rules, you're not ever going to get a return on continued network investment, which means you'll stop investing in the network." Now, today's notice is the start of a new chapter in the public discussion about how we can best maintain a free and open internet while making sure that ISPs have strong incentives to bring next-generation networks and services to all Americans. And to reiterate, this is the beginning of the process, not the end. The FCC is simply seeking comment on these proposals, which draw on the Clinton-era light-touch approach. We also ask questions about the existing Bright-Line rules. Over the next 90 days, the American public will have a chance to share its views on them. And in the time to come, the FCC will follow the facts and the law where they take us. Additionally, there are a few things that are different from the last time around. First, we are proceeding in a far more transparent way than the FCC did in 2015. Back then, the agency pushed through the 317-page Title II order before anyone outside this building was allowed to see it. The draft document I proposed to my colleagues has been available to the public online for 3 weeks. Indeed, the public has already submitted over 1 million comments on that draft. And I will go one step further today and publicly commit to this. On my watch, any order that we may adopt in this proceeding will also be made widely available well before a vote is called. You may agree or disagree with what the FCC is doing, but you have been and will be able to see what it is we're doing and why. Second, we aim to conduct a credible cost-benefit analysis of our policy decisions. This simply wasn't done back in 2015. Indeed, the economic analysis in the Title II order has been called wrong, unsupported, and irrelevant by the FCC's own chief economist at the time. Now, this time, as we make our decisions, we will have our expert staff carefully review the evidence on investment and other variables. We will not rely on hyperbolic statements about the end of the Internet as we know it and 140-character argle-bargle, but rather on the data. Finally, like my colleagues, I would like to thank the staff of the Wireline Competition Bureau, the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, and the Office of General Counsel for their work on this document. Nathan Egan, Christine Fargetstein, David Horowitz, Madeline Finley, Marcus Mayer, Chris Monteith, Linda Oliver, Bill Richardson, Suzanne Tatro, and Ryan Yates. I would also like to thank my Wireline advisor, Dr. Jay Schwartz, PhD in economics, for the intensive work over the last few weeks. I'm deeply grateful to all of you for your hard work on this important issue. With that, we'll proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner Clyburn?
Nay.
Commissioner O'Reilly?
Aye.
The chair votes aye as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges as granted. Thank you to the staff of the Bureau. Madam Secretary, if you could please announce the next item on today's agenda.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the seventh and final item on your agenda will also be presented by the Wireline Competition Bureau and is entitled Connect America Fund. Again, Chris Monteith, Acting Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Ms. Monteith, please feel free to proceed.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the Wireline Competition Bureau is pleased to present for your consideration a notice of proposed rulemaking and order revisiting whether the rule adopted in 2011 requiring rural telephone companies to recover a minimum dollar amount for voice services from their customers, commonly referred to as the rate floor, continues to further our statutory obligation to ensure quality services available at just, reasonable, and affordable rates. The accompanying order would freeze the rate floor for 2 years unless or until further actions are taken in this proceeding. Joining me at the table today are Lisa Hone, Associate Bureau Chief, Alex Menard, Deputy Division Chief of the Telecommunications Access Policy Division, and Jesse Jackman, an Attorney Advisor in the division. I would like to acknowledge and thank others in the Wireline Competition Bureau that have worked on this item, including Roger Wook, Division Chief, Industry Analysis and Technology Division, Suzanne Yellen, Assistant Division Chief, Industry Analysis and Technology Division, and Stephen Wang, an Attorney Advisor in TAP-D. I would also like to thank our colleagues in OGC for their review and invaluable input. Jesse will present the item.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The rate floor rule, adopted in the 2011 USF ICC Transformation Order, requires that any ILAC recipient of high-cost loop support whose rate for local service plus state-regulated fees is below the rate floor shall have its, quote, high-cost support reduced by an amount equal to the extent to which its rates for residential local service plus state-regulated fees are below the local urban rate floor multiplied by the number of lines for which it is receiving support, end quote. The rate floor is determined based on an annual urban rate survey. Under a waiver adopted in 2014, support reductions for charging prices lower than the rate floor are being phased in, such that carriers do not currently lose universal service support if their rates are at or above $18. And that number will rise to $20 on July 1st, 2017, and $22 on July 1st, 2018. Various stakeholders have argued that the rule is not fully consistent with Section 254B of the Communications Act, and that a single national rate floor does not necessarily account for the differences in rural and urban areas. Accordingly, the NPRM seeks comment on whether changes to the current rate floor methodology are needed to address these concerns, and if so, what those changes should be. As an alternative to changing the methodology, the NPRM seeks comment on eliminating the rate floor altogether. The NPRM also seeks comment on the interaction of the rate floor with state rate making and state universal service funds, and on the administrative and compliance costs of the rate floor, as well as ways to reduce those costs. The NPRM invites stakeholders to submit a cost-benefit analysis of the rule. Pending our review of the record that develops in this proceeding, the order freezes the monthly rate floor at $18. The order finds that temporarily freezing the rate floor at its current level, rather than allowing it to increase in 2017 and 2018 in these unique circumstances, serves both the public interest and the purpose of the rule by ensuring against unduly low rates for subsidized consumers. The Bureau recommends adoption of this notice of proposed rulemaking and order and requests editorial privileges extending only to technical and conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jackman. I'm actually shocked that the room is cleared out for the main event, but nonetheless, we will proceed to comments from the bench, starting with Commissioner Clyburn.
And I was going to ask him whether you were related to Hugh. Is that how to do it?
Not related. We actually spell our last names differently.
Yeah, I was wondering. I looked at it again. Okay, anyway.
No.
Jesse's
just wishful thinking. I'm sorry. And not that you're. Well, anyway, I'll get to my statement because this is going nowhere fast. I'm sorry about it. Imagine being asked, would you rather pay $5 per month or $20 per month for the exact same voice service plan? If there really is no difference, and if the offers were truly identical, you would opt for the cheaper service plan, right? But if this scenario is only made possible by your carrier's ability to shift the true cost of service onto other carriers, in other words, through everyone else's contributions to the Universal Service Fund, then I must regrettably inform you that we have a real public policy problem. This is the exact scenario that the Commission addressed a few years ago while we were in the process of reforming our universal service and inter-carrier compensation mechanisms. Some rate of return carriers were charging their customers extremely low voice service rates and recovering the rest of their revenue requirement from inter-carrier compensation and the Universal Service Fund. This resulted in shifting the cost of service from the people who were actually receiving the service onto other ratepayers nationwide, including those who were least able to afford it. The Commission addressed this issue by adopting a requirement that carriers must recover a certain portion of the ultimate cost of service from their end-user customers rather than from other ratepayers. This was known as the rate floor, and it was paid to the average urban cost of service for voice. Carriers could charge less than this amount, but they would be unable to recover the difference from the Universal Service Fund. Over 2 months ago, I made a public commitment to fix some outstanding unforeseen issues that resulted from our efforts at rate of return reform. This package of actions included a fix for the capital investment allowance, pausing and finding a new path forward on the rate floor, and dealing with waste, fraud, and abuse in the high-cost program. I have also spoken out in the past, as you may note, about means testing in the high-cost fund. In an ideal world, we would have dealt with all outstanding rate of return issues at the same time, in part because many of these issues are neither difficult nor novel, but they all have an impact not only on rate of return carriers, but on ratepayers nationally. Admittedly, last month, we fixed one of the issues that I considered part of that package on a standalone basis. I let my misgivings about addressing that issue on an a la carte basis go and supported that item because I believed it was good policy. It got something done sooner rather than later, but I continue to hold out hope that the next steps would address those issues left outstanding. I made it clear then, as I do now, that dealing in tandem with the rate floor and with waste, fraud, and abuse were key. Deja vu. Now we are considering a second item, the pausing and fixing of the rate floor, and surprise, it comes before us for consideration on a stand-alone basis. My repeated calls for addressing waste, fraud, and abuse in the high-cost program, ignored. Any hope of addressing these concerns in a balanced, comprehensive package, smash. And the freeing up of additional money to impact the budget control mechanism, which would have been the result of a more efficient process, not happening. So I respectfully dissent. Aggressively going after waste, fraud, and abuse in our universal service programs only seems to happen when one program is being discussed, and that is Lifeline. Addressing blatant abuses in the high-cost program, no mention here, even though every dollar that is wasted in the high-cost fund means one less dollar to support rural broadband networks. That is neither fair, equitable, nor consistent when it comes to policymaking. The American public should not be guaranteeing a return on investment for personal travel and expenses, entertainment, alcohol, artwork, corporate jets, corporate boats, and mortgages of company employees. This is common sense. It is good stewardship. And many in the industry generally support this kind of clarity, so it is unbelievable to me that when a clear opportunity presents itself, we fail to take action. Commissioner O'Reilly and I have spoken about ways we can work to improve the service consumers get in rate of return study areas, and I remain hopeful that these discussions will bear fruit. I would like to thank the staff of the Wireline Competition Bureau for the work on this item. If I am counting right, you have had substantial involvement in at least 8 or 9 meeting items over the past 4 months. You know who to blame for that, right? I know the work has been hard and the hours are long, and while I have occasionally disagreed with what you have been asked to draft, I sincerely appreciate your professionalism and dedication to public service. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Clyburn. Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Compared to the circulated version seeking to eliminate the rate floor as it's come to be known, the document we consider today contains vital fixes and revisions that are the only reason I can now support it. During the new freeze period, I will work in good faith with my colleagues to find other ways to accomplish the same goals. But if they cannot be achieved, then the existing rate floor will be restarted. This structure is intended to provide sufficient impetus to explore and develop more precise means to get to the same outcome. Make no mistake, I support the rate floor concept, and I'm puzzled why everyone else doesn't. Contrary to all of the misinformation, the policy is built on a solid premise. The Commission, as stewards of the contributions made by those that pay into the Universal Service Fund, expects a certain level of company revenue to be recouped from its own subscribers prior to receiving subsidies. In other words, there's a basic level of fairness expected before consumers throughout the nation contribute to cover the lower rates offered in more rural parts of America. The obligation in the law to promote reasonably comparable rates to rural communities was meant to ensure that the cost of service in rural America was not too high. The rate floor originated when the Commission was presented with particular and demonstrable evidence of a number of rural companies charging far, far below reasonable rates to subscribers, but seeking full reimbursement of their costs from the scarce federal USF dollars. To be clear, the policy does not mandate higher rural telephone rates, and the Commission is not engaging in rate regulation. Companies are free to charge lower rates. The Commission, or more accurately, the hardworking citizens throughout our country, just won't contribute to keep those rates artificially low. If rural telephone companies want to charge their customers $1 per month, they most certainly can, but subsidies won't be provided for the delta between the consumer rates and the set rate floor, which is based on the average of rates in non-rural America. Are there better ways to calculate the rate floor? Probably, and I will happily explore those with all interested parties. But if anyone thinks that this is a backdoor way to end the policy with my support, forget it. Additionally, we should not ignore that setting a more generous rate floor, as Commissioner Clyburn just mentioned, will have an impact on the rates for standalone broadband. To be more specific, because we have a cap on high-cost budget, each dollar spent to keep the rate floor artificially low is $1 less available to bring down the consumer rate for broadband services in rate of return areas. This very issue came up in our last Senate Commerce Committee oversight hearing. As it presently stands, it is a zero-sum game, and the prognosis for additional high-cost funding seems difficult. And do not count me among those that will ever support imposing USF contributions on broadband. This is a non-starter for me. Let's also accept this stone-cold reality. Rural does not necessarily mean poor. There are plenty of rich, middle class, and poor people throughout all rural America. Our job at the Commission is to ensure that those who face higher costs and cannot afford them are still able to access communication services. That means we shouldn't subsidize telephone or broadband rates for the very wealthy people, no matter where they live. If God has bestowed an American with high levels of material wealth, then we ought to expect that person to pay for services themselves, instead of forcing potentially poor and middle-income individuals elsewhere to provide subsidies. While overall incomes in rural America can be lower in some communities compared to the nation as a whole, so can the cost of daily necessities. For this reason, I reject the theory that we must or should subsidize everyone who happens to live in a particular area, no matter their income. That's a waste of resources, and it's why the federal government means tests the majority of federal programs, certainly the bigger and more expensive ones like Medicare. For instance, if a person receives Medicare, if a person receiving Medicare makes more than a certain income per year, they pay higher Part B monthly rates. If we can means test Medicare, why not the FCC's high-cost program? There is no reason why anyone who earned more than $1 million last year shouldn't pay the full cost of their telephone or broadband service. Toward that end, I've worked with Commissioner Clyburn on draft text to take the first steps on this project. We intend to put this out for consideration shortly. I firmly agree that it may take a bit of time to get all the pieces to work, and I have no intent of adding layers upon layers of burdens on communication companies or disrupting parts of the program that have already been adopted. But moving in this direction is the right thing to do. At the same time, examining ways to alter the existing rate floor does not mean that there aren't other adjustments needed to the rate return regime. While we instituted major reforms during the last commission that the industry still fully supports, there are a number of so-called punch list items or small technical fixes that are appropriate. For example, there seems to be general support at the Commission and relevant associations that ratepayers shouldn't have to pay more to cover the cost of some companies' officials' golf club memberships. I am disappointed that we couldn't get this all done as part of this one package, as they seem like reasonable and common sense steps to ensure that dollars are spent on actual broadband deployment. But I do appreciate the Chairman's commitment to work in good faith to accomplish these items one way or another in the very near future. So I thank the Chairman for his indulgence.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Reilly. In 2016, the average rate for basic phone service in Washington, D.C. was $13.78 per month. But since July 1st of last year, federal law has mandated that rural telephone companies charge their customers at least $18 per month for the same service. Why? It relates to the federal subsidies or high-cost universal service support that the FCC directs to these companies. In 2011, ostensibly concerned that certain rural carriers were over-subsidized, the FCC required these companies to charge artificially higher minimum rates on penalty of losing federal fundings. This is what is known as the rate floor. As I said, the rate floor today is $18. It's scheduled to climb to $20 this July and $22 next July. This is an especially hard hit on the consumers who can least afford it. And that's because rural Americans make less money than their urban counterparts. For example, the median household income in Washington, D.C. is over $75,000. The median household income in Lyon County, Kansas, which I visited last October, is under $41,000, less than 55% of the capital's tally. Mandating higher rates under these circumstances, in my view, violates the spirit, if not the letter, of Section 254B of the Communications Act, which requires the FCC to ensure quality services available at just, reasonable, and affordable rates. Notably, the rate floor imposes higher costs on rural consumers without any corresponding federal benefit. It hasn't saved federal taxpayers any money. And that's because companies can avoid losing support by simply raising their rates. And it won't save taxpayers money going forward either. That's because now any subsidies that are lost by one provider are simply redistributed to others. It's time to give the rate floor a hard look. And that's why I'm pleased that under this notice, we will explore whether to fix or eliminate this broken policy. I'm also glad that we will freeze the rate floor at $18 to prevent the impending 11% price hike that rural consumers would otherwise face a few weeks from now. It's unfortunate we couldn't get a unanimous vote, since we had been working in good faith to address the problems with our rate of return rules. On March 13th, 2017, for instance, Commissioner Clyburn said, "I would support fixing our rules regarding the per-location cap on the capital investment allowance." Only 34 days later, at our most recent FCC meeting, we adopted this fix to the CapEx limitation. We worked together to put consumers first. In that same speech, my colleague said, and I quote, "I would support hitting the pause button on rate floor increases." So we teed up an item hitting the pause button on rate floor increases. And for the past 2 weeks, we accommodated literally every single item my colleague asked for on this item. But now, 62 days after calling for a stay of the rate floor, my colleague is voting against a stay of the rate floor. And to be sure, that is consistent with the 2011 vote to mandate higher prices for rural consumers. But it isn't consistent with putting consumers first. As always, I am grateful to the staff of the Wireline Competition Bureau for their excellent work on this matter. In particular, Lisa Hone, Jesse Jackman, Alex Menard, Chris Monteith, and Suzanne Yellen. Your work has helped low-income rural consumers spend their hard-earned dollars on their families instead of on their phone bills. With that, we will proceed to vote on the item. Commissioner Clyburn?
Nay.
Commissioner O'Reilly?
Aye.
The chair votes aye. The item is adopted with editorial privileges granted as requested. Would my colleagues like to make any announcements at this time?
Mr. Chairman, I know you will join in on this, but we lost a member of the FCC family, as you know, Carolyn Faust. Yeah. And, when you see people in the hall, even if you don't interact with them on a daily basis, and they give you a smile and ask you how you're doing, you really, that might be the only positive gesture you get. You get, and she was.
Mike's very friendly to you.
Whatever. Okay. Subject to check, as you lawyers like to say. But I just really wanted to pay tribute to her. Again, we lost her at the end of last month, and I believe her family celebrated her life on Monday, so I don't want to mention that. On a more positive note, I wanted to mention the presence of Commissioner Gloria Strasani in the audience. I wanted to say hello. I missed saying hello to you the last time you were here. I was not going to do that a second time, so I just wanted to acknowledge that. Mr. Chairman, thank you, and I know you would want to co-sign on a couple
absolutely.
of those items.
I join my colleague in her points that she made. Very well done.
Well, thanks, Commissioner Clyburn, for recognizing Ms. Fauch. She spent 21 years, 1 month, and 10 days at the Federal Communications Commission. She was a consumer advocacy and mediation specialist in CGB, in the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau. And as importantly, she was a smiling face, as Commissioner Clyburn pointed out in the halls. And it's always sad when a member of our family passes away, and that is certainly true with respect to Ms. Fauch. We certainly have her family and her friends in our thoughts and our prayers. I also have to announce another departure. That is Bill Friedman. He's one of the mainstays of OGC's Administrative Law Division, my former home, and he'll be retiring at the end of the month. Bill epitomizes, I think, what makes the FCC staff so terrific. Experience, judgment, and legal skills aplenty, the ability to work well with people inside and outside of the building, and also a very dry sense of humor, which one has to have when one labors in the field of acronyms and CFR and the like. Bill has kept the commission on the straight and narrow since 1978. He began with the Safety and Special Radio Services Bureau. I never even knew that one existed that long ago. But he then worked in the hearing division in the old Broadcast Bureau and then finally at OGC. He left private practice, but as that quote in The Godfather goes, we kept bringing him back in, so he came back to OGC in 2003 to work in the Enforcement Bureau. He later spent over 5 years as Associate Chief of the Media Bureau and then as Deputy Chief of CGB, with stints as Acting Media Advisor for Commissioners Tate and Baker. He returned at OGC in 2013, where his primary focus has been on the most challenging Media Bureau transactions and other adjudications. Bill will be relocating, as I understand it, to Fenwick Island, Delaware, where I'm told that he'll spend a lot more time with his family, with his fast cars, with loud music, and his nearby grandson, Harry, in Philadelphia. He's going to, I imagine, still show up for the World Series, which I think he's hoping Cleveland will finally win after over a 50-year wait, and visiting the Cleveland Hall of Fame, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as well. Bill, we will miss you. Thank you for your service to the Commission, for your friendship, and for your wise counsel over the past many years. With departures come also arrivals. Just want to announce a couple at the FCC. One is Brian Hart, who I believe is backbenching in the corner over there. Brian is the new Director of Office of Media Relations. Brian came to us from the office of Senator Roy Blunt from Missouri. I got to know him when we were both working together for the staff of Senator Sam Brownback many years ago. He's also spent time as the Director of Government Relations at H&R Burlock, as a Vice President at Ketchum Public Relations, and as somebody who has often tormented me with practical jokes and bad humor these many years. Keep your enemies close, I guess, is the best way to explain that. But Brian, we are really glad you're on board. Anthony Petrone is the first of our summer law clerks to arrive. Anthony, if you don't mind standing up, please. He started this week, and he's got to be disappointed that he picked such a boring week to come to the FCC. Very sleepy and uneventful time. But Anthony's a graduate of the University of Connecticut, and he just completed his first year at the George Washington University Law School. Previously, he interned with the Business and Human Rights Resource Center in London, Center RE, not ER, for those keeping score, and the Connecticut Republican Party in Hartford, Connecticut. He's an avid sports fan. We haven't yet ascertained his particular affiliation, but I'm sure if he has the good sense that we think he does, he'll root for the Chiefs, the Royals, and the Jayhawks. He also coached 2 youth basketball teams. Most importantly, he's also a black belt in karate, or karate as we call it. So if anyone tries to mess with our office this summer, you're going to have to sweep his leg, for those of you who are fans of the Karate Kid. Anthony grew up in East Lyme, Connecticut, and Margate, New Jersey, both beach towns, but he says he's thrilled to be here along the beautiful waterfront of Washington, D.C. and Southwest. Anthony, we're very grateful that you're here. Last but not least, I wanted to make simply an announcement. For decades, we in this country have recognized National Police Week. It was first started under President Kennedy in 1962 to recognize law enforcement officers who had fallen in the course of their duties protecting the public. The officers who serve here at the FCC also, I think, deserve our commendation. We easily can take it for granted, and I often do myself, but the dozens of security officials here go the extra mile each and every day to keep us safe and to make sure that we can do our jobs free from interruption. And that's why I had the privilege of taking the time this past Tuesday to walk around and to visit with all of the guards and the security staff here at the FCC and to thank them for their work. We are so grateful that all of you are here. Fred, Mr. Leek, the rest of the team, you are terrific. A number of characters also among the security officers. They know who they are, but they really they really brighten our day, and I can't tell you how much it helps to walk in seeing a smiling face and engage in the banter that starts off the day on a very positive note. So if my colleagues don't have any further announcements, Madam Secretary, if you could please announce the date of the next FCC agenda meeting.
The next agenda meeting of the Federal Communications Commission is Thursday, June 22nd, 2017.
Second day of summer, I guess. Until then, we stand adjourned.
We'll begin the press conference now. Just because of the large number of people here today, we'll need to keep it to one question so we can get to everyone. Also, after this press conference will be the Bureau press conference, and then Commissioner O'Reilly and Clyburn will also be having press conferences. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon, everyone. I know you're all dying to ask questions about the Part 95 items, so I will promise to make this brief. Today, the FCC proposed to return to the light touch regulatory framework that governed the Internet for almost 2 decades. This bipartisan approach was established by President Clinton and a Republican Congress in the Telecommunications Act of 1996, and it was maintained by Democratic and Republican FCC chairmen alike. The prior commission's Title II order in 2015 marked a significant break from this regulatory consensus, subjecting Internet service providers to Depression-era rules designed for the Ma Bell monopoly. It's important to stress that our vote today was the beginning of the rulemaking process, not the end. And I'd like to say two things about the path ahead. First, this will be an open process. We want to hear from stakeholders on all sides of the debate, and I'm sure we will. Our notice of proposed rulemaking asks many important questions, and I encourage all interested parties to offer substantive and detailed answers. As we go forward, we will be guided by the facts and the law, so it is critical that we develop a robust record. Being open also means that we will be transparent about our work. Unlike in 2015, we will not hide from the American people any final rules that we might want to adopt. Just as was the case with this NPRM, the public will be able to see what we are voting on before we vote. Second, we are committed to reaching a solution that both preserves a free and open Internet and provides strong incentives for the private sector to invest in next-generation networks. We want a regulatory framework that will bring better, faster, and cheaper broadband to all Americans. And we want Americans to be able to use that high-speed Internet access to reach the content of their choice. One last point before taking your questions. My opening joke was premised on the understandable interest that our Restoring Internet Freedom NPRM has generated. But I am grateful that the Commission took meaningful action today on a number of fronts. For example, I'm pleased that we took action to stop rural American phone bills from going up this summer and to launch our review of the so-called rate floor. As a number of groups have told us, including Public Knowledge, the National Consumer Law Center, the Center for Media Justice, Common Cause, the Center for Rural Strategies, and the Rural Broadband Policy Group, the rate floor, and I quote them, will harm access to service for some of the most vulnerable consumers in rural America and will impose a disproportionate burden on older Americans who are more likely to be living on fixed income. Blocking this July 1st price hike was a big win for rural America, and it represents the latest step that we have taken to put consumers first. And with that, I would welcome any questions you might have.
Monty? Monty Taylor, ComDaily. Can you tell us how the NPRM for the net neutrality has changed since the draft you put out? What's different about it?
Well, you'll get to see some of the changes that were made, and I would imagine that draft will be made soon enough.
Can't preview any of that?
You'll get to see it soon, I promise.
It seems like with the commenting system, Kyle Daly, Bloomberg BNA, there are some simple things, even just like a CAPTCHA or closing the API for comments would get rid of some of the bots. Are you going to do anything to make the commenting system, to improve the commenting system, I should say?
Generally, on technical matters pertaining to the ECFS system and the FCC's website, I will defer to the Commission's IT professionals, and I'll just say today that our top priority is to ensure that the website remains accessible to the public, and our IT professionals are hard on the case, making sure that that is so.
Lydia? Hi. Lydia Bayud, Event Driven News. Mr. Chairman, what's your position on whether 4 national wireless companies are necessary to provide a competitive wireless marketplace?
As I said a couple of weeks ago, we don't. I don't see in the abstract any particular number of competitors or marketplace structure that is the sine qua non of a competitive marketplace. I view the facts as they exist and make the appropriate judgment based on those facts. And so, if it really just depends on the facts that are in the record, frankly.
Dave? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. David McCabe from Axios. You were pretty critical of your predecessor you saw it as politicizing this agency. You've also said that you don't see yourself as a political actor. And so I'm wondering how you balance kind of that aspiration with what has been some pretty politically charged rhetoric around this net neutrality item. Both you're courting the right and you also chose to announce it coupled with some paragraphs attacking a left-leaning advocacy group. And so I'm wondering how you hit that balance.
Well, look, I think there are always going to be a few issues where people of different political affiliations will disagree. That is just the nature of public policy debate, and that principle applies here at the FCC as well. But by and large, 95% or so of the issues that we deal with have been unanimous, and in particular, if you note some of Commissioner Clyburn's statements over the last couple of months on pretty high priority things, moving rural broadband to upstate New York, making sure we reform our Connect America Fund to deliver 4G LTE to unserved parts of America, getting some of our rules on wireline infrastructure and wireless infrastructure modernized to allow people to have more access to broadband. I mean, these are pretty significant actions that the FCC has taken, and there, I've always had an open door to her, including even today. You heard that she had some concerns about some of the proposals on Main Studio, and so I said, let me hear your concerns, and let's figure out what questions we can incorporate in that notice of proposed rulemaking so that the record reflects not just what the core questions of the lead proposal, but some of the concerns that you have. And we want to tease out those facts as well. And so, look, there are always going to be issues where we disagree, but you know who I am at this point, and I've worked in good faith with her and with others who disagree, and that's how we're going to continue to proceed.
I'm sorry, just one follow-up. It seems like you're suggesting we can't do follow-ups?
No.
Okay.
Jim Pusengarrow with the LA Times. Former Commissioner Gloria Tristani told me just a few minutes ago that she and other Title II supporters were prevented from filling the seats back there as they emptied during the commission meeting. And I'm wondering how that fits with the openness and transparency you talked about in the net neutrality proceeding.
I've been focused on the items we were voting on today. I haven't had a chance to look at the administrative issues regarding who was in the room.
In terms of the access for people into the building and overflow room and all of that?
Again, I've been focused on the substantive work we've been doing. It's been a pretty busy meeting, as you could tell. And, I don't have any information on that I can share with you.
Lynn Stanton, TR Daily. How would you respond to Commissioner Clyburn's suggestion that the lack of a proposed other legal basis, if you're not going to do Title II, for any kind of open internet rules, how that sort of implies that you don't really intend for there to be any rules if there's not going to be a legal basis for having rules?
Well, look, the entire purpose of this public conversation is to identify what the appropriate legal framework should be, and that's why we seek comment on the Bright Line rules in particular. And generally speaking, I mean, there were some who wanted the FCC to simply issue a declaratory ruling saying that as a matter of law, we're sweeping away the entire framework and in one fell swoop. And that was not the process that I wanted to engage the FCC to engage in. We wanted to tee up a number of different ideas, tease out from the American public all the range of issues that are presented, and then give us the facts that we need to make the appropriate judgment.
So without any framework to base rules on?
I'm sorry.
Well, you'll see. I mean, you have seen in the item exactly that we're teeing up all these questions and asking for public comment on them.
Margaret McGill with Politico. There have been reports, I think, on both sides of people filing comments under names of people who maybe didn't consent to have those comments filed. There have been a lot of, as we've seen, maybe not substantive comments filed. How do you kind of weigh keeping the proceeding open with dealing with, I guess, fake comments and some of the other stuff that comes through?
That's a good question. Look, I encourage broad participation in this rulemaking, as in any FCC rulemaking. And what matters most are the quality of the comments, not the quantity. And we will make our decision, as I said earlier, based on the facts that are in the record, on the relevant law that is presented. And obviously fake comments, such as the ones submitted last week by The Flash, Batman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, and Superman, are not going to dramatically impact our deliberations on this issue. This is an issue that's impacted me personally, as hundreds of comments, as I've seen, have been submitted under my own name. Now, there's obviously a tension, as you suggested in your question, between having an open process where it's easy to comment and preventing questionable comments from being filed. And generally speaking, this agency has erred on the side of openness. We want to encourage people to participate in as easy and accessible a way as possible. Now, of course, this isn't new. Fake comments were filed in the 2014-15 proceeding, including under names like Donald Duck and Mickey Mouse and Hitler, Stalin, D's nuts, and the like. And just to name a few. And this time around, I think the bottom line is that I urge everyone who's interested in this issue to participate in the process in an honest and forthright way. And that is, I think, the best way to make sure that your voice is heard.
Brendan? Hi, Mr. Chairman. Brendan Borderline from National Journal. There's a broad narrative, really on both sides of the Hill, that a big goal in the FCC's move here is really to bring Democrats to the table on comprehensive net neutrality legislation in Congress. Given a lot of the rhetoric that we're hearing from Democrats on the Hill right now and just the general sort of dysfunction going on over there, are there any drawbacks if the FCC does roll back Title II, does some of the other things that you guys are looking at in this NPRM, and Congress fails to act?
I mean, there are at least two different hypotheticals implied in that question. One is what the agency might do, and one is what different political actors on Capitol Hill might do as a response to that hypothetical. So I can't really speculate. I would defer to the elected officials that you might be speaking with to figure out what they think is the appropriate way forward. But we're going to, as I said, going to stay focused on the facts and the law and make the appropriate decision that is in the public interest.
Hi, Ali Breland with the Hill newspaper. Telecommunications companies like AT&T, Comcast, and Charter have cited broadband investment infrastructure publicly in contrast with the arguments that you've made and with what they've told you. It seems like that the comments they've made are like in diametric opposition to one another, and that they're either misleading their investors, which is illegal, or they're misleading you. Which one of those two do you think it is?
Well, look, if you look at the studies that have been presented, among the top 12 ISPs, investment in infrastructure has gone down 5.6%. Now, you can make it appear otherwise if you want to count AT&T's investment in Mexico or Sprint's change in its accounting procedure to change handsets from operational expenses to capital expenses. At the end of the day, I think most Americans would consider investment in the United States and the network to be what matters. And if you do that, then I don't think you can count foreign investment. I don't think you can count just accounting changes and the like. And that's just among the top 12 internet service providers. Now, remember what I mentioned earlier with respect in my statement during the meeting with respect to the 150 different ISPs of very different technologies, fixed wireless, cable, telco, and you name it, even municipal broadband providers. They are the ones who are critical to promoting more competition in the marketplace. They are the ones who are telling us that Title II is standing in the way of them connecting more Americans with digital opportunity. And so, yes, we also need to focus, of course, on the macro level, the top 12 and the marketplace overall. But we also should maintain a focus on the smaller providers who are critical, who are the canaries in the coal mine, so to speak, when it comes to the effects of Title II regulation.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Dave Sheverson from Reuters. I was going to follow up on Aquaman, but I'll turn to something else. You made some comments about Stephen Colbert and these complaints the FCC's gotten. Most experts you talk to say there's no way that comment, given that it was bleep, could violate the three-part test under the obscenity laws that are in effect after 10 o'clock. So can you more specifically describe what you're doing? And oftentimes the FCC does not actually ever officially acknowledge when it ends a review of complaints.
Thanks for the question. Look, it is the standard practice for the FCC to review all complaints that are filed by consumers. And I don't have an update to provide on the review of the complaints in question, but that is the basic framework that is applicable here.
Hi, Kate Cox with Consumer Reports. We're wondering, why is the amount of capital investment the key metric we keep hearing, and are there other big metrics of broadband success we can expect the FCC to examine in the net neutrality proceeding?
So with respect to infrastructure investment, it's critical because broadband networks can't exist in the abstract. It requires a lot of capital to deploy these networks and to expand them. And so if consumers want better, faster, cheaper internet access or internet access at all, those networks can't simply be fiated into being, so to speak. It takes money to build those networks. And that's why we're focused in particular on the numbers on infrastructure investment, because at least when I travel around the country, and I've had the chance to go to towns big and small, the north, the west, the east, and the south, that is the common refrain, that internet access is a fervent desire of millions of American consumers. And so we want to make sure that we have a regulatory framework that promotes infrastructure investment as much as possible, especially for rural and low-income urban consumers who all too often are, as I've said before, digitally redlined out of that part of the economy. As for the other factors, I talked earlier about 5G networks and how we need to encourage that kind of innovation to make sure that tomorrow's networks, which we might not be able to conceive today, have a regulatory framework that encourages their growth. And that's why, in addition, I quoted Mark Andreessen, as you might remember, in terms of network investment and the importance of that.
Brian? Hi, Mr. Chairman. Brian Fung from the Washington Post. Critics of the NPRM have vowed to take legal action to challenge it if it succeeds. What gives you confidence that a court will uphold your interpretation of the law when the D.C. Circuit takes that up?
Well, again, I'm not going to hypothesize about what action the FCC might take that could generate a petition for review. I have no doubt, obviously, given the history of this issue, that litigation always remains a possibility. I'll simply say, though, at the bottom of page 4 of Judge Srinivasan and Tatel's opinion, they make clear that in the wake of the Supreme Court's decision in Brand X, the FCC retains the discretion to classify Internet access as an information service. And so I think that the substantive law here, as enunciated by those judges in particular, is pretty clear.
Hi, Lizo with Politico. I had a question also around broadband investment. I was wondering why the FCC didn't do its own research on the economic impact of the rules prior to the NPRM and relied on outside research, and if you could provide a bit more detail around what you guys have planned for the future studies that you'll be doing, that would be great.
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, I can't recite every word of the NPRM verbatim, but we actually have a section devoted to cost-benefit analysis, and one core component of that cost-benefit analysis is the effect of Title II regulations on infrastructure investment. And the goal here is to start the public conversation to make sure that we develop the facts in the record that can give us a sense, a quantitative sense, as opposed to a qualitative one only, about the state of infrastructure investment over the last 2 years. And so that will be publicly available as soon as we release the document. 3 weeks ago, like the past FCCs, I made public the NPRM itself, so you could see that part of the NPRM already. But that's what we're going to be focused on in part in the time to come as part of that economic analysis.
Todd? Hi, Mr. Pai. Todd Shields with Bloomberg News. In the NPRM, as released 3 weeks ago, one of the questions was whether to retain a ban on degrading traffic or on throttling. Does that language still persist in the NPRM today, through today's vote?
You'll be able to see it soon. Yes, we tee up all these questions about the OSC comment on the Bright Line rules and what the appropriate legal framework should be going forward. I'm sorry?
Including that aspect, the throttling.
I believe the questions were in the NPRM are still there. Yeah.
Harper Neidig from the Hill newspaper. I was wondering if you could talk a little more about what the FCC is doing in the wake of the DDoS attacks a couple of weeks ago. Have there been any more cyber attacks? What steps are you taking to combat efforts in the future? What are you doing to crack down on possible intrusions that have already happened?
I appreciate the question again on any issues relating to the FCC's website or ECFS. I would refer you to our IT professionals. They've been hard at work on this issue, and they understand the technical nuances. You can work through the Office of Media Relations on that.
I think that is it for now, so thank you very much. And now, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We will start the Bureau press conference first, please.
All right, do folks have a question for public safety related to the AT&T outage report? Any questions on them? Okay. International Bureau, Earth Stations? No. Wireless Bureau related to personal radio services? Okay, flying through these. Media Bureau, modernizing media regulations? Monty, the Media Bureau here? Thanks, Monty. I don't want to come up here and have no questions. You know?
Figured I'd just ask you.
Okay. Good luck.
Yes.
Monty Taylor, ComDaily. I just had a quick question. Is it contemplated that retrans issues will be part of this review, or is there some sort of separate proceeding on retrans in the future?
Sounds like a variation of the question you asked me yesterday. Trying to trip me up. So, as was discussed and as you saw, the PN is very general. It's short, and we're soliciting comment on what regulations need to be modified, eliminated with respect to all media entities. So the industry is free to file on whatever topics they deem appropriate.
Okay. That's probably all I got.
Okay.
Any other questions on that item? Anything on the main studio rule?
I got one for that too. Does the NPRM contemplate just a partial reduction? I think the draft did, just partially reducing the staff, like just having one employee, or is that treated in the NPRM at all instead of having two?
We ask questions about that. We ask questions whether we should eliminate it or whether we should modify it.
Okay.
Anything else on this one? Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Any questions for the Wireline Bureau related to restoring internet freedom? Okay. Right now? Yeah. All right. Does anyone, before we do that one, does anyone have any questions related to the rate floor item? No? Okay, great. Thank you. So, Jim, you had a question?
Yeah, I just wonder if you can go over the timeline for the NPRM in terms of comments, when the comments are due, when the reply comments are due, just to give people a sense of how long this process is going to take.
Sure. Well, first of all, we expect to release, as the chairman said, the NPRM shortly. And the item itself will establish a formal comment and reply comment period. I'm not at liberty to tell you the precise dates now, but as the chairman said, we expect to have a robust engagement on this issue, so we will provide sufficient time for anyone and everyone who's interested to participate fully. You should see the item shortly.
Shortly as in today?
Not today. Not sure it will be today. Don't hold me to that. But we expect it to be within days, not weeks.
Without indicating specific deadlines, can you talk at all about whether there is a longer period than was suggested in the draft NPRM, which some people had called for up on the Hill?
And I don't recall what was suggested in...
I think it was like mid-August, was like assuming a fairly prompt release of the...
So I think something on the order of 90 days, which is what the chairman has indicated today.
Is there a sense, just speaking about timelines, is there a sense on when, say, like the CBA could get underway and be released?
The CBA is part of the item itself. So we expect to have comments to help inform the cost-benefit analysis.
So we wouldn't expect to see any of those individual elements before we actually see, I know the chairman said at some point before the vote, but, a draft report in order, I guess?
Well, consistent with his reform process, we are releasing items 3 weeks in advance of consideration by the full commission of the item itself. So at that point, you would see a draft of the item, including the cost-benefit analysis.
And the cost-benefit analysis will be made solely on what people voluntarily provide in the comment process rather than any kind of request for information specifically that staff believes they need to have to conduct a cost-benefit analysis?
In proceedings that the Commission works on, we of course will do our own analysis and our own research, and to the extent we are concerned about whether we have a sufficient basis on which to act, we would certainly engage with interested stakeholders or others.
The roughly 90-day period you talked about, is that for initial comments? Is that to include reply comments? I'm just trying to give people a sense of how long they might have to weigh in on this.
I think that's for the formal comment and reply comment period is what we're thinking of at this point in time. But please, still sort of to be determined, and I don't want to be held to something and have that change. And the item will come out in short order.
Today?
I think that was asked and answered. Okay. Short order.
Can you address whether there were any significant substantive changes from the draft to what you now have in front of you in terms of any edits that were done during?
And the chairman addressed that question as well. Understand your eager interest in seeing this, but I'm not going to comment on what changes were made to the draft. You'll see it shortly.
The chairman talked about the cost-benefit analysis the commission is doing. Can you describe in more detail the timing of that? Is that going to be done after the public comment period closes, or how close will that come to a final proposal that we'll see?
Well, the cost-benefit analysis is a part of the proceeding, so you'll see in the item that we have a section addressing the cost-benefit analysis and tee up specific questions and what we'd like to see in terms of submissions to help inform our cost-benefit analysis. So that's an integral part of the proceeding that it goes, lockstep with the proceeding itself. And if others have, other views or want to further inform, but.
So the FCC is not doing an independent CBA. You're just relying on the research you've already referred to and what we saw a few weeks ago.
No, I think what Chris said a moment ago in answer to another question is that the FCC, of course, does its own analysis and relies on the record to heavily inform our the research that we're doing independently. But we have, as you know, a number of economists and technologists on staff at the agency who will be working on this.
Any other questions on this item? All right, great, thank you. So next up, I think Commissioner O'Reilly is going to take some questions. Commissioner here.
How are we doing today? You look very non-caffeinated. Did you want to start down here? And we'll. Sure.
I don't have one yet. Go ahead, Kyle.
All right, I've got one. I was wondering if you wanted to respond to Commissioner Clyburn's statement that she doesn't believe the Republican majority thinks that any services are Title II services.
I'd have to go back and look at her analysis. I only heard it the once, so I want to actually read her statement in full. It was just quite a lengthy dissent, so I want to read it in full. I think that some of the things that she mentioned, though, off the top of my head, as I were taking notes there, seem to be very tough cases for a Title II scenario. I think she said messaging, and I'd find that to be a very tough Title II scenario. I obviously don't, I've given my views in the past on a number of different scenarios, so I have to go back and see. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that it's one way or the other. There's Title II services that exist today, and then they're treated and governed that way. We look at our rules all the time and see what needs to be modified, and classification is an important function for the Commission. Okay, we'll go back this way.
Thank you. She also said that the media deregulation order, or NPRM, starts out with the presupposition that you need to get rid of all these rules to make way for industry. Do you have a response to that?
Well, I don't. If you see the item, you've seen the item. I don't know that it's changed since then. I think it is a review of all our rules. It's separate from. We don't have the requirement in Section 11 to look at the media rules or the cable rules. So here's an opportunity the chairman's putting forward to examine our existing rules and determine what should stay and what's necessary. I think she made the point in a nice way, and I'm not to be too critical, that she said she might be jumping. I don't know the exact phrase here, but speaking over, overly concerned about this item. Presupposing what the outcome may be, I think was kind of her sentence. So I find the item to be straightforward. We're going to review our existing rules and determine what should stay and what should go. I don't think that's a predisposition that everything's going to go. I outlined a couple of different examples that I think would be prime candidates, but that's for my colleagues and the record and for others to comment on, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you.
Sure. You're next. Or however, I guess we'll just go down the list. Yes, sir.
Jim Puzengaro with the LA Times. You've stated before your preference that Congress deal with the net neutrality issue. Are you hopeful this process that just started today will spur action on the Hill as you go through this process?
Well, we haven't got an outcome of this item. This is an NPRM, so we'll see where it goes later this fall at some time, depending on the comment period that you guys were asking about. But at some point we'll get to conclusion and see where there. But I don't speculate on what Congress or may or may not do. I'm taking my cues from the statute and the record that will be before me, and trying to make the best decision I possibly can from that. And we'll just see what I've heard multiple different things on different people commenting on what can and may happen in Congress, and I don't know what's accurate or not. In a past life, I probably would have better analysis. In this one, I couldn't tell you what they may be capable or not capable of doing. That's for them to decide.
But beyond, are you hopeful that that's what happens?
I think that the only lasting piece on net neutrality can be driven through statutory provisions by Congress. I think that's the only way to address the issue long term. I think it provides the certainty that everyone's been seeking. I worked on past efforts. The last one I think I worked on was 2005 when some of these issues. So I think it's the only way to address the issue long term and provide lasting peace. Hi, Lynn.
This may not be the fairest question in the world because you can't control what other people say, but
what a precursor.
Do you have any concerns that reactions today, not just by opponents of reversing Title II, but supporters of doing that, carry the tone that the FCC has taken the step towards doing this, presupposing an outcome that we haven't reached yet? Do you have any concerns that undermines the confidence of the public in the way the FCC carries out its work?
I don't think so. I think the public will comment as they see appropriate in the coming months. There have been a number of comments so far. I think I've made the point before. I think that the more substantive comments are more important to me. I do look at all the comments, I do acknowledge all the comments and try to give weight to all comments, but only some of them, there are many that I get that are very colorful in their direction to what I should do, and so there's only so much weight I'm going to give to those, and so I think the public is not going to be dissuaded from commenting on the topic. There are a lot of different views on this, and we'll just see where it goes. Sorry for the delay.
That's okay. Margaret McGill with Politico. I wanted to ask, it sounds like you asked for a question to be added to the NPRM related to, I guess, maybe, I don't know if it would be preempting, but trying to do something to make sure that states don't do their own net neutrality rules.
So the question I asked dealt with jurisdiction, and then the classification gets to jurisdiction issues and what's the ramification for that. And as I outlined in my statement, I want a full. I think Chairman did a wonderful job of asking as many possible questions and providing a fulsome record on many different directions. And that seemed to be one that needed more clarification. I have concerns and have articulated them outside of this today regarding localities establishing privacy rules for them. There's a city of Seattle has pushed an example on privacy, and we're having reinstituted fights over VoIP in a couple of different states. So I have concerns about what the ramifications are for that, and I want to know if this is declared, depending on how the item goes, and we'll see the record and the comments and the law. But where this goes, if this is declared an interstate information service, that is a ramification for the jurisdictional lines going forward.
So just to be clear, you kind of have a concern that maybe states and localities could do their own net neutrality rules. Is that something that? Not
net neutrality probably per se, well, depending. But I would say it's more the subsets of privacy, the VoIP. I'm having a difficulty in my own head how somehow the underlying broadband service can be a Title I service, assuming how things play out, depending on where things go but certainly in terms of some people's viewpoint that it's a Title I service, I have difficulty believing that an application, a VoIP, in my opinion, should be treated as a Title II service, and that seems to be where states are trying to involve themselves. And you look at the case in Minnesota, the court that just ruled on this issue dismissed the PUC's effort to do so.
Brendan Bordelon with National Journal. Critics of the proposal, I guess, to roll back to Title I classification say that it would extend beyond its effects on ISPs. Specifically, it would look at potentially, I guess, dismantling the FCC's universal service programs as it relates to broadband. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't see that being. I'm happy to follow up with you on that, but I don't see that being. The language in 254 is quite broad. And it provides us an opportunity not just for those governed under Title II, but also we can extend. So I don't see that being. Now, I articulated in my statement I don't have any intention of supporting an effort to impose contributions on broadband services. Don't expect me to do so. In my position. I just don't agree with that for multiple reasons, and I've given speeches on this. Congress just enacted a permanent moratorium or permanent ban on internet access taxes. So to me, this is a non-starter. Yes, sir.
Ollie Breland with The Hill. I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked Chairman Pai to hopefully get, I guess, a more direct answer to the question. But
you're saying the chairman didn't answer your question?
He did not. So the question I have is that broadband executives at places like AT&T, Comcast, and Charter have specifically talked about how Title II and referenced it directly and referenced net neutrality will not affect their investment in broadband, which has been largely what your and Chairman Pai's arguments have been predicated upon. And then at the same time, these sorts of companies have said that it will affect their investments to you. So it seems like in one situation, they're misleading one group or the other. What do you think is happening? Where's this discrepancy occurring?
And not to quibble with your question, but I haven't. My concerns in this space have been multiple layers. It's not just the investment argument. That is definitely one argument that's teed up in the item. But my arguments have been legal precedent, and you can go through my statement now or my dissent in the past in terms of the gymnastics that the commission went through to get to the point they did, and skipped a lot of steps in the 2015. So but to your point on the investment issue, I don't believe that there are statutory provisions and protections from lying in either situation. I think that I thought the chairman did a fairly good job of answering the point that the data depends on what the question is asked, and so there is investment in infrastructure that is happening, whether it be in Mexico or whether it be for other services that does deal with overall CapEx that's different than whether it's on broadband services as it relates to the impact. And you can have both increasing CapEx in a year and still have not as much as Title II still impacting that. That doesn't necessarily mean they're disagreeing. Yeah. You can have increasing CapEx that Title II can still depress what it could have been and what should have been absent the rules.
Unless I'm misunderstanding it, these executives have directly said that net neutrality is not affecting their investment strategies, though.
Yeah, I think that those. I'm happy to review any material that you want to take a look at. I think that you see different people make different comments within the same company, and that doesn't mean that they're lying to one or the other. They have different responsibilities, and the data that they're presenting may be completely consistent with the question that's asked. Okay. In some regards, it can be similar to a polling question. If you ask it this way, you're going to get this answer. If you ask it this way, I think they're not lying. I have no factual data to suggest that they are lying to the commission in terms of their presentations at this time.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Mr. O'Reilly. It's Todd Shields with Bloomberg News.
Hi, Todd.
Are there any net neutrality rules that you would back?
That I would, what's the last
That
word?
you would support. Should there be net neutrality rules at all?
Well, we're in a new item here, so I'm going to let the record and the law and review what's put forward. I have raised concerns with all of the rules and the need for any rules. I certainly have deep concerns and have expressed such as it relates to a bright line ban on paid prioritization and the general conduct standard. I think I've gone into at length on why I disagree with. The value of the ban on blocking and throttling, I question whether it's necessary, but I'm going to let the record and the comments that accumulate from that and the law that governs the statute, governs our activities, help frame the decisions as we get closer to the end of the item. But I've raised concerns with all of those areas. I've raised concerns and a deep. I do not believe that Section 706 exists, has a affirmative authority for this setting. So I think I'm well articulated on many of the points.
Thank you.
All right, I think, yes, sir.
So if you don't like Title II and you don't think Section 706 is a grant of authority here, where is the authority to make net neutrality rules?
Well, that's a question for the record to determine, and we look to ask a commentary on all of those points, but it may get back to the question pressed before that's for an issue for Congress to decide. There are many areas that I've said over the past where I may or may not want to or would personally be interested in taking action, but the statute doesn't allow us to do so. And so I'm that's just, we're limited on what we can do. I don't believe Section 706 has an independent grant of authority. I've said that in the past, and we'll see if the comments come in this item that change that viewpoint. It seems kind of hard. I was there at the time, but I'm happy to look and see what arguments are made and see if they change my mind. But to that point, to the extent that it's determined by the record that there is no authority to act, that's something for Congress to consider if they decide to do so. Yes, sir.
You mentioned the one question that you wanted in the NPRM that got in there. Is there any other changes from the draft that you can tell us about?
I think that it'd be unfair for me I didn't find that there's too much change to the item, but that's for them to. I think they said they're going to get out expeditiously, but I don't. It's not significantly different than the version. There are some pieces that I think their first obligation is to respond to the record and the comments, and so I'm sure that they did a good job at that. But I don't find it to be that significantly or substantially rewrite in any way.
Thank you.
Of course. All right, we'll have puzzled everyone enough. Will everyone have a wonderful day? Hopefully you all warm up.
Okay, I think Commissioner Clyburn is here and I'm going to take your questions next.
Good evening. It's been a while. Are there any questions by chance? Yes?
Is there any version of a main studio rule elimination that you would support? I mean, would a partial elimination of it where they keep just one employee or something, would that satisfy?
Well, one of the things that I made clear is if you have a very small station, and even a mid-sized station, but when you talk about small by way of employees, if indeed it is burdensome, I made it very clear in my statement that I would be receptive and empathetic to that. I really am concerned about what used to be one of my biggest observations when it comes to radio. Because I grew up knowing and loving, y'all have heard me say this, radio, and localism was part of that, fueled part of that passion. And when things started changing and we started getting simulcast, and it was very clear that you could go from city to city and every station sounded the same, I just thought I lost a lot. Now, when you talk about, broadcast stations and what it means to the community and what they serve, as underscored by Senator Smith, I think we need to be very careful in what we do. And I think it serves the station's interest to not get caught flat-footed if indeed something were to happen in a community, and they are the one source that people can rely on that has a signal 24/7, and they are not. They don't have either boots on the ground or someone there answering the phone to ensuring that the public interest standard is upheld. So that's my biggest concern. I'm not rigid, I think it's important for us to. That's why I said I would have a problem with a blanket rule. If there's something with a smaller station or a smaller footprint that you can demonstrate that it's a hardship, I am not so closed-minded or naive to think that a one-size-fits-all approach applies here.
Thank you.
Yes.
Commissioner Clyburn, Jim Pusengarrow with the LA Times. You touched on this in one of your statements. I wonder if you can expand on it. The deregulatory emphasis that the FCC seems to be pursuing under Chairman Pai.
Well, one of the things that is concerning to me, and I thought about this on the way back down, is I thought about this as a sort of a jingle, so to speak. If you remember Schoolhouse Rock in the days, and we were talking about this a couple of days ago, and the majority seems to have a problem or an issue with conjunctions. And what I mean by that is we look at one side of the coin and not the other. There's not an and, but, or, when it comes, to a policy. So what I'm hearing is, particularly, Monty mentioned the rule that, thank you, main studio rule. That's the lack of lunch. The main studio rule issue. We can't look at this, in a vacuum. That you've got to, every action that we take, when you come from a deregulatory posture, or you say this, a rule, we need to talk about whether a rule has outlived its usefulness. There's a reason why that rule was implemented in the first place. And so if we just look at, something is 20, 30, or 40 years old and adopted when the ecosystem looked much different, and not take into account what it would mean to get rid of that rule, what the impact would be, what the economic impact, because we've been talking about, that also over the last several months, econometric, research and the like. What would the impact be for the communities? If we don't do that, then honestly, I believe we run the risk of not upholding the standard that we're supposed to, the public needs and necessity, and we will leave communities and consumers worse off.
But do you feel that the agenda is to get rid of as much regulation as possible?
It is obvious to me. It seemingly we're not looking at a main, $86 billion merger. We've got the capacity to look at that. We're not looking at that. We just overturned a decades. Well, the UHF discount that was decades old, way past its prime. We said, let's bring it back. It makes no technological sense. And what that does is really allow an entity to basically pad, their holdings. And it would lead the public to believe that, at least for some of those holdings, it's 50% of what it is. There seems to be this posture that, everything that industry presents and every posture, that they take is the right one. And every time when you have 4 million and people, others, who want, robust, media ownership rules, all of the other things in terms of impact, there seems to be no listening to those voices. So yes, everything that I hear and sense, since the transition has seemingly been about big consolidated business only, and very little feedback, that is listened to when it comes to how communities will be impacted and what individuals and smaller businesses, what the impact will be on them. Yes.
If
If there seems to be a lack of listening on the amongst the majority commissioners here, what's the way ahead on the net neutrality battle for you? Is it, and for people who agree with you, is it a lost cause? What can you do? What do you foresee in coming months?
I never believe in lost causes. I'm a person of high faith, and I believe in the American people, and I believe in the voices that they have. I believe in the power that they have to influence, boards and commissions and their elected officials. 4 million people affirmed, got us on a pathway back in 2015, and millions more will lend their voices to weigh in. So, as the chairman says, and he is not incorrect in this, he launched something today, and it will allow the public to further weigh in. And if we truly listen to those voices and those individuals, those small businesses and others outside of those 4, 5, or 6 large internet service providers, I think we will make the right decision. So I never believe all is lost if we truly listen to those who weigh in.
Thank you.
Speaking of listening, do you feel like your concerns were listened to at all since the release of the draft of the net neutrality or internet freedom NPRM, and today? Did anything you say in terms of requesting changes or edits, if you did request changes or edits, have any impact? What was it?
Do I think, particularly when it comes to the open internet item? Yes. If you're asking me particularly to the open internet item, I don't know if I can say that I felt individually that my voice would be heard. On some of the other items, it was very clear that they listened. But I think the die was already cast as it relates to that item. And again, if we were truly listening to the American public, we would not be here today.
Thank you.
Yes.
Sorry.
It might be my fault, but I saw her hand first. Thank you.
Thanks. Kind of given where things are at the commission now, do you think that Congress should be getting involved? Do you think that the answer on net neutrality lies in some kind of legislation negotiated between both parties?
So one of the things that we've been hearing, including from the majority, is, this would be best done at the congressional level. Now, while I won't take a particular position on that, I will say that if they were to weigh in, and they have talked about weighing in for some time now, that they should give the expert agency in this nation the flexibility to do its job. People have an expectation that there should be a referee on the field ensuring that the open internet remains open and free. And when I say free, I've noticed a number of people, I don't mean free in terms of cost. I mean free in terms of openness and the way we are able to access it. And so if those, whatever Congress, if they were to act, they will allow this agency to do what it does best, to be the referee that will look out for the public interest, that will ensure that the infrastructure and the rules and regulations that we promulgate are ones that will allow for robust investment and innovation. Then I think that will be as close to a proper balance as possible. But all of those elements have to be in place.
Two questions. One, just to follow up on something I asked you last month, usually your term is up on June 30th. There is some speculation that maybe the leaders in the Senate are either close to reaching a deal or some agreement about extending the chairman's term and filling the empty slots. Is your expectation that you'll be staying on beyond June 30th, or?
You will probably know my fate quicker than I would. To be honest with you, look, this has been an incredible honor and privilege for me. And I knew when I signed up, so to speak, what my term of service, what it is. My term, as you know, officially ends at the end of June, and any day beyond that, is a day that I will be another day for me to serve the American public. The rest of it, the ball's in other people's court, and I will respectfully be as cooperative as I know how to ensure that any transition is smooth whenever it comes.
And there's obviously a lot of news going on these days, given the FBI and all the various issues permeating through Washington. Do you think the net neutrality debate is not getting the attention, maybe the focus of the American people? Is how big a concern is that to you about changing minds or convincing your fellow commissioners to make substantive changes?
Well, I'll address that. You made me think about three different dynamics, because I think I heard at least two different, elements there. I have not met anybody in my traveling, no matter, even my niece and nephew who are, in college, went a little bit beyond college, but that's a family issue. We need to talk to him about graduation. But they don't know about this debate. They are very much aware. And I think, other personalities that we've been speaking about in the last few weeks, making the public more educated in their own way about how important an open internet platform is. I really think, people are learning more and are hearing more and engaging more. One of the things that we need to work on as an agency is how we ensure that people are comfortable in participating in the process. So, hopefully we will continue to work with the chair, and we will continue to work with those who manage our website to ensure that people can call, write, or weigh in online in a way that is barrier free. So I attempt everywhere I go to to talk about what an incredible platform it is, and we cannot take anything for granted. And that's I'm a prophet of one when it comes to talking about an open internet, and I think there are a number of others who are doing the same. I thought I saw it. Yes.
Chairman Pai, he talked about, he made it sound like your position on USF floor rates had changed, and he talked about that a bit. Do you have any response to what he said?
Well, one of the things that we talked about, and that is part of what I said when I talked about, my conjunction. What was not said, by the chair is that we have had, conversations about the means testing, that we had conversations about, a number of other items that we thought should have been a part of a package. And I've been saying this for months, and we've been going back and forth for a number of weeks. And I made it very clear that if we did not include, issues that I think would have strengthened the integrity of the item, that if we didn't address some long-standing issues, particularly dealing with waste, fraud, and abuse, I thought that if we did not do so, the item would be more bare and we would be less efficient. So I dissented today, not because I had an issue with the rate floor per se, but I could not get a firm commitment to move forward on what I consider the other outstanding issues. And, that overture, with all due respect, was made. I did not sense, or I did not get any type of commitment moving forward. And so I thought it was important to take a stand. Now, remember, I voted in an a la carte manner. I voted on a singleton, earlier, even expressing and letting them know that I had an issue with us, taking, one element at a time. And so my fear is we will be talking about waste, fraud, and abuse and other items, 6 months, a year from now. And I just don't think that is, a proper way to really be accountable to the American people when it comes to saving money and having a docket, an item that is robust and takes all elements into account. To decouple is inefficient, and I think it was a lost opportunity. Okay, well, if there's nothing further, I wanted to add something that I noted when the chair put up his chart. I thought it was very interesting, when I looked at that, the kind of counterpoint when it comes to investment and what the effect, if any, the 2015 order has had. And I looked at that chart and I thought it was very curious. Number one, that chart came from an analyst, a telco paid analyst, who cherry-picked data. Specifically, he used partial data from 12 internet service providers. He didn't use a comprehensive list like the other studies that we've seen. He cherry-picked partial data from 12 internet service provider, and this is also the same author of a now debunked 2014 study that said that Title II would result in $15 billion in increased taxes and fees. What he predicted never happened. So I just wanted to, that has been, ever since I saw that chart, that has been on my mind, and I wanted to go on record as addressing that. Data is important, but good data is imperative. Thank you very much.